If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 226, Chapter 223, Shattered Dream. Meanwhile, seated alongside the Rakuzan players, Akashi's normally composed demeanor betrayed a rare display of emotion. Tension surged through him as he tightly gripped his fist. A complicated light flickered in Akashi's eyes, an unprecedented wavering in his confidence. Yet, as if jolted by an electric shock that shook even his soul, Akashi snapped back, and he swiftly regained composure. His eyes, if anything, grew even colder. His heart, momentarily touched by an uncharacteristic ripple, now seemed as cold as ever, as though the momentary disturbance had been nothing more than an illusion. Meanwhile, a dark figure covered in a shadow was seen in his unconsciousness, letting out what seemed like a sigh of relief. Back on the court, as Kaioh High resumed play and sent the ball in, it didn't take long for them to pass it to Kai's. Yet, like a shadow, Suna's figure appeared, snatching the ball. The Kaioh High players were immediately on high alert. To their surprise, Suna didn't make any drastic movements. He calmly dribbled the ball in his hand. Seizing the opportunity, Kai's reacted promptly, closing the distance to put pressure on Suna. Yet, Suna's eyes were now void of the sparks that had streamed across his pupils a while back, signaling his departure from the zone. Kai's couldn't help but be taken aback. Remaining calm, Suna dribbled the ball, his gaze fixed on Kai's from head to toe. A sigh escaped him as he abruptly flicked his arm, sending the ball blurring out of the court. What? Kai's was thoroughly confused, his eyes reflecting disbelief as he looked at Suna for an explanation. Suna paid no heed to Kai's as he turned his attention to Kaioh's coach, who stood on the sidelines with a grim expression. Addressing him directly, Suna commanded, "Get him out of the game now." Takuchi's response was silence, a heavy sigh escaping him. Suna's tone held the weight of authority, completely disregarding any hierarchy between them. This time, Takuchi let it slide, recognizing the urgency of the current situation. Meanwhile, Kasumatsu and the others at Kaioh High seemed to have caught on to what was unfolding, their eyes fixed on Kai's figure. Kai's was caught in the midst of this peculiar interaction and wore a confused expression. Then, Takuchi's blunt words cut through the air, "Kai's, get the heck out. Nakamura will take your place." The color drained from Kai's face as he processed the abrupt command. "Hey? Are you?" Kai's began to voice his objection when a sudden jab to his stomach left him groaning in pain. Rolling his eyes in annoyance, Kai's found himself facing Kasumatsu, the stern captain of the team. "Shut up and just listen, you idiot. Do you think we can't do anything without you? How dare you underestimate your own teammates?" Kasumatsu's scolding words sliced through the air, carrying a mix of frustration and determination. Kai's had been the driving force, the lone warrior fighting for the team as they faced the seemingly invincible Fukuda Sogo. "Captain's right, Kai's." Moriyama smiled, offering Kai's a supportive thumbs up. The realization hit them like a wave of shame. Kai's was fighting for their sake. "Just leave the rest to us." "Whoa, I'm fired up. I will try my best." Hayakawa's usual loudness echoed a burst of enthusiasm in the air. However, one thing resonated within the team. It was time for everyone to step up and fight their own battles. A battle they had left in the hands of Kai's to fight alone. Amidst the emotional whirlwind, Kai's eyes widened as he looked at his teammates. There was an unspoken reassurance, a silent promise to carry on the fight. Everyone. Overwhelmed, Kai's felt a lump in his throat, and tears welled up in his eyes. Their assuring presence struck a chord deep within him. Yet, reality jolted him back to the game. Kai's, who was still grappling with his emotions, suddenly lost his balance. Fortunately, Kasumatsu was quick to react as he extended a helping hand to steady him. "Kai's? Are you all right?" A rare concern edged Kasumatsu's face. In his normal state, Kai's might have teased Kasumatsu for showing such an expression. However, confusion marked Kai's features as he muttered with a perplexed expression, "What?" His body seemed to betray him, the sudden imbalance leaving him questioning the very ground beneath his feet. "He's going to suffer for a while." Observing Kai's seemingly losing control, Suna shook his head in disappointment. It was evident that Kai's body should have given up a long time ago, even before he entered the zone. What kept him moving was the adrenaline coursing through his body, fueled by determination and frustration, witnessing his teammates on the verge of breaking apart. Kai's would undoubtedly need time to recover from this ordeal. If Tsuna hadn't noticed and kept pushing, it might have led to unforeseen injuries that could have prematurely ended Kai's career. He couldn't shake off the sense of disappointment that lingered as he walked slowly toward his team. His figure appeared lonely amidst the hustle and bustle of the court. In no time, Kai's was safely ushered to the bench before Kaioh High summoned the medic to take him out. However, Kai's refused, insisting on receiving only basic treatment. He was determined to witness the conclusion with his own eyes. Takuchi frowned at the insistence but ultimately allowed it. As the game pressed on, Kaioh found themselves confronting Fukuda Sogo's might without Kai's by their side. Despite Kazumatsu's words of assurance to not underestimate his team, the reality was that facing Fukuda Sogo without Kai's left him far from confident. Yet, he had no choice but to grit his teeth and face the challenge head-on. The rest of the team mirrored his determination as they braced for the impending clash. With only 1 minute left until the game's conclusion, time seemed to stretch endlessly for Kaioh High. Powerless to halt the unstoppable force of Fukuda Sogo's attack, they could only endure the pressure building against them. Even though Tsuna had stepped out of the zone, the momentum of Fukuda Sogo was relentless, triumphing over anything Kaioh had thrown at them. The referee's final whistle echoed through the gymnasium, and Kaioh could only cast frustrated glances at the scoreboard. Their aspirations of winning the tournament, a dream nurtured especially by the third-year players in their final chance, were now shattered. The gnawing score of 144-80 stared back at them, a stark reminder of their defeat. While the outcome was somewhat anticipated, having teetered on the edge of despair, the reality of it still managed to frustrate them. Chapter 227, Chapter 224, Beyond the Generation of Miracles. The Blue Elites lost by this much. They're unbelievable. Our king. They're still the best. Chatter and murmurs erupted among the audience as they observed the game's outcome on the scoreboard. Gasps were followed by a crescendo of cheers that eventually filled the gymnasium. Akin silently observed both teams lining up for the post-match ceremonies. Turning to glance at Siren's seating area, he mumbled, "Siren's up next, hey." The outcome of the game between Fukuda Sogo and Kaioh High didn't surprise him much. Tsuna's strength was apparent, and even in the brief display of power, Akin began to grasp Tsuna's true level. The realization should have dawned on the others in the audience. They should now understand that Tsuna. He's surpassed the generation of miracles. Midorima sighed, his words hanging in the air. The members of Shoutoku High left the audience area in silence, knowing they had their own game ahead to secure a spot in the semi-final. So, he's not just a monster, hey. Takao quietly mused, taking note of everyone's tense expressions. He added, "He's a true monster, a freak of nature." Meanwhile, back on the court. "Congratulations on the win, you guys truly earned it." Kasumatsu approached Tsuna, supporting Kai's on his shoulder. Tsuna was taken aback by Kasumatsu, detecting the deep-seated frustration etched in his eyes. Nevertheless, despite the internal struggle, Kasumatsu commendably approached him and extended his congratulations. Tsuna couldn't help but respect Kaioh High's captain for that. "Thanks, it was a tough game." He then turned and offered a smile, extending his hand for a handshake. Kazumatsu's contemplative gaze lingered on Tsuna's face as they exchanged a firm handshake. His devilish side truly disappeared off the court, hey. Kasumatsu mused silently. He then shook his head lightly as he said, "Best of luck in the semi-finals. Siren isn't a weak team, and we still have some unfinished business, but go all the way and win it for us, all right." Wearing a confident smile, Tsuna nodded appreciatively. "Thank you for the reminder." "They're not bad, indeed," he acknowledged. His gaze shifted subtly, a thoughtful glint in his eyes. "But you don't need to worry about us. You need to worry about them." Tsuna's implications prompted a wry smile from Kasumatsu. If he didn't know any better, he might have considered Tsuna arrogant. Yet, a closer look revealed it as pure self-confidence, a justified assurance rooted in his undeniable skill set. Reflecting on his own perspective, Kasumatsu acknowledged a similar confidence within himself when Kai's was on the team. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that, unlike Tsuna's self-assurance, his own might lean towards arrogance. A sigh escaped him as he attempted to shake off these troubling thoughts. These two. Meanwhile, Kai's was childishly sulking on the sidelines, observing the two conversing as if he were invisible. Ignored and treated like air, he couldn't help but feel a pang of exclusion. "I'll win it the next time, Kazumaki," Kai's declared, his displeased expression belying the determination that gleamed in his eyes. His gaze locked onto Tsuna, who had turned to look at him. But Tsuna quickly redirected his attention back to Kasumatsu, leaving Kai's with disbelief that widened his eyes. Did he just ignore me? Kai's wondered. He was thoroughly taken aback. Turning to Kasumatsu, Kai's expected at least a glance from his captain. However, Kasumatsu remained engrossed in the ongoing conversation, completely disregarding Kai's presence. An awkward silence settled in as Kai slowly realized that both Tsuna and Kasumatsu were actively ignoring him, leaving him on the sidelines of their interaction. Kai held his heart, thinking, is this how Kuroko always felt? The pain was almost physical, worse than a breakup. Thankfully, someone else approached. They turned to see Hizaki walking over, eyes fixed on Kai's with determination. Shogo. Caught off guard by the unexpected attention, Kai's felt a surge of emotion, as if his presence was finally being acknowledged. The moment was so touching that he almost teared up. Despite Hizaki's generally unlikable demeanor, Kai's found himself considering, if just for this moment, that Hizaki might actually be likable. This time, I might lose, Ryota, Hizaki spoke with a serious tone, leaving Kai's to tilt his head in confusion. But you guys won, though. Kai's responded, his lips twitching as he retorted, speechless at Hizaki's statement. Ignoring Kai's reaction, Hizaki continued, but I need you to prepare yourself to lose against me next time. Mark my words, Ryota. I will steal your victory. With that declaration, Hizaki turned and walked away. Kai's felt his lips twitch even more furiously, rendered speechless. He watched Hizaki's departing figure and mumbled, what victory? I lost the game, are you stupid? Well, they certainly seemed lively. Kasumatsu commented, shaking his head in disbelief. Tsuna chuckled in response, indeed, they are. Tsunayoshi Kazama, Kaioh High will come back stronger next time, Kasumatsu declared, prompting Tsuna to look at him with an amused expression. He continued with determination gleaming in his eyes, even without me, if we ever face each other again, we will take our revenge. Certainly, we welcome any challenges that come our way, Tsuna responded, earning a satisfied nod from Kasumatsu. He then turned and walked away, dragging the sulking Kai's along. I still want to make my declaration like you, though, Captain. Shut up. Observing both their figures walking away, Tsuna shook his head and mumbled, well, we would certainly do so if I were still here. As Tsuna returned to his team, Nijimura turned to him and asked, done with your business here? Tsuna nodded as he glanced at the team before saying, all right, listen up, everyone. Today, we faced a tough opponent and won. But let's not get too comfortable because we've got bigger battles ahead. The team responded with cheers, and it brought a smile to Tsuna's face as he continued, no holding back. Let's go all the way. Let's go. The Winter Cup will be ours as well. You're right. We've got the Inter-High, might as well get our hands on the Winter Cup as well. Ishida, Mochizuki and Aguilera excitedly chatted with each other, dragging Hizaki along in their circle, who was now resigned to his fate and stopped refusing their approach. Tsuna, Nijimura and Alexandra just lightly shook their heads at the scene as everyone made their way out of the court and back to their accommodation. The gymnasium remained lively as both teams departed from the court, filling the space with cheers. Chapter 228, Chapter 225, Whispers of Defeat. In stark contrast to the lively atmosphere surrounding Fukuda Sogo, Kaioh High's mood took a downturn as they made their way through the corridor. The pathway stretched ahead, dimly lit and solemn, guiding the defeated Kaioh High team away from the jubilant cheers of the crowd, leaving only the lingering echoes of their recent loss to Fukuda Sogo. Silence enveloped them. The once anticipatory air now hung thick with frustration and sadness, each player trudging forward, burdened by the weight of disappointment. Their expressions contorted in mixed emotions, a struggle to mask the disappointment and despair etched on their faces. Tears welled up in Kazumatsu's eyes, unable to be contained even after he had maintained a professional demeanor while congratulating Tsuna earlier. The impact of the defeat hit Kaioh High harder than they had anticipated, the weight of it settling heavily in the hallowed corridors. They had been so close to securing a ticket to the semi-finals. Still, they remained incapable. They were just too feeble. The atmosphere shifted abruptly, a somber mood replacing the once jubilant cheers that had echoed through the arena moments ago. A dense silence settled in, a striking contrast to the excitement behind them. With each step through the corridor, the echoes seemed to magnify the team's collective disappointment. In a choked voice, he uttered, I want to win. I want to win so bad. With everyone. His words lingered in the air, cutting through the heavy silence. The vulnerability in Kai's voice resonated with every member of the team. His voice echoed through the silent corridor, making their chests feel stuffy. Kasumatsu opened his mouth, but after a moment of hesitation, he gritted his teeth and closed it again. He could only look at Kai sobbing bitterly and frustratedly. Silence enveloped the corridor, each player absorbing the weight of unspoken sentiments. A prolonged sigh resonated as Takuchi silently observed his team, feeling the weight of failure as their coach. Back in the gymnasium, the arena buzzed with jubilation, yet Siren High sat amid the cheering crowd with their expressions grim. The defeat of Kaioh High against Fukuda Sogo cast a shadow over their impending semi-final match. The awareness that Fukuda Sogo would be their opponent in a few days lingered heavily in the air. Haiga sighed, shattering the oppressive silence. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, weariness evident in his voice. Even with more games scheduled after Fukuda Sogo vs. Kaioh High, no one argued about leaving early. Whether it was Shoutoku High's game or Rakuzan High's, it didn't hold much significance as their own opponent had already been determined. In unison, they rose from their seats, quietly filing out of the arena. The memories of Fukuda Sogo's formidable performance lingered in their minds like a haunting refrain. Especially Tsuna's surprising prowess that he briefly showcased a while back played on a loop in their thoughts. They were well aware of King of Kings being a formidable team from the start, evident by their inter-high triumph this year. Despite recognizing the strength of their opponent, Siren High was confident in their own improvement to confront them. They even perceived Fukuda Sogo as their most significant challenge yet. However, the revelation that Tsuna surpassed even the generation of miracles left them shaken. As they moved in silence, the impending challenge weighed heavily on their minds. The thought of confronting the King of Kings in the semi-finals was daunting, and almost unconsciously, they found themselves arriving at a building. The group had been walking for nearly half an hour, and an unspoken tension lingered with each step. As they looked up at the towering building of apartment, the reality of their upcoming battle weighed heavily on their minds. Breaking the silence, Izuki suddenly mumbled, "Fukuda Sogo, hey? We're up against the King of Kings in a few days." His words hung in the air, mirroring the collective apprehension felt by the team. Amidst the heavy atmosphere, Kagami couldn't help but feel a twitch at his lips. Pointing at his teammates, he couldn't contain his exasperation. "Why are we coming to my place?" The unexpected outburst briefly disrupted the solemn mood, eliciting a few chuckles from the weary Siren High players. "Well, we sort of ended up at your place without thinking too much. It's just the closest spot we know." Kiyoshi scratched his head awkwardly. "I suppose that can't be hell." Kagami closed his eyes and sighed, understanding the situation. His words hung in the air as his eyes shot open. Veins pulsed on his temples, frustration clear in his voice as he erupted, "Why are you guys barging in already? Show some respect. Wait for the owner to let you in, you reckless bunch." Kagami shook his head in disbelief. The audacity of everyone, acting like they owned the place, caught him off guard. They were already streaming in as if it were a free-for-all. Still, they seemed to ignore him as Kagami massaged his temple exhaustedly, and he found himself sitting on the floor as the others occupied the sofa in his living room. Aida chuckled, attempting to ease Kagami's tension. "Ahaha, don't worry about it, Kagami." But Kagami's displeasure lingered, leaving Aida to scratch her head awkwardly. She stood up, determination lighting up her expression. "Well, to make up for it, I'll cook you guys some dinner." The announcement startled everyone in Siren. Kagami immediately swallowing his displeasure and quickly approached Aida. "Coach, please don't. You already put in so much effort for us," Kagami urged, gesturing for Aida to stay seated. "I'll take care of the cooking. It's the least I can do as a good host." Aida blinked in surprise. Are you sure?" She scratched her head, turning to Kagami for confirmation. The others chimed in enthusiastically, offering their support. "Of course, coach. Kagami's taught us a thing or two in the kitchen. He's practically an expert. Yeah, trust him. We've got this covered." "Absolutely, just relax and let Kagami handle it." "Yeah, coach, I've got this. Please, sit down and wait patiently." Kagami felt his lips twitching, hearing these guys encourage him to cook even after they crashed into his place without his permission was making him feel like smacking them in the head. However, it was for his survival. He couldn't let Aida cook at all costs. Well, alright then. Aida grumpily settled back into her seat. Little did she admit, she was secretly excited about indulging in Kagami's cooking. After all, he had proven to be a better chef than her. Without much waiting time, the meal Kagami had cooked was finally ready. Everyone couldn't help but gulp their saliva upon seeing the delicious spread on the table. Dive in. Kagami grumbled as everyone immediately started filling their plates and stuffing their mouths with the tasty food. He sighed at the scene, grabbed a plate, and got some food on the table before stuffing it into his mouth. However, he immediately frowned, sensing that something was amiss, before excusing himself to go to the toilet. However, as he finished his business, his head started spinning, prompting him to wobbly find himself back in the dining room. The lights were dim, and everyone had passed out, which made him pale. What in the world? Hey? Is everyone asleep already? A soft voice, making him shiver, was heard. Kagami turned toward Aida, who was holding a lot of supplements in her hands, innocently sprinkling some on the food. In Kagami's point of view, her innocent act looked like the devil's work. He felt his sight darkening as he mumbled, "Fucking witch." Thud. Kagami collapsed onto the floor and slipped into unconsciousness. Oh? Kagami's out too? I was hoping for someone to chat with. Tough luck. Chapter 229, Chapter 226, Renewed Resolve. The Yoyogi Gymnasium echoed with the rowdy cheers of the crowd as Shoutoku High faced off against Kaioh High. The smooth swish of the ball through the net harmonized with the cheers as they witnessed Midorima's trademark high arc three-pointer. Shoutoku was barely winning against them, yet Midorima's mind seemed to have taken a detour amidst the game. Takao approached Midorima and nudged his shoulder with a friendly, "Nice shot, Shin." Midorima's response, however, remained silent. His gaze, usually sharp and focused, now seemed distant. The memories of the last game played on a loop in his mind, a reel of images that demanded his attention even amid victory. Takao furrowed his brow, studying Midorima more closely. The lack of response from the usually prideful shooter felt odd, leaving an unspoken tension in the air. The rest of the Shoutoku team, though successful in the current game, shared a similar state of distraction. The memory of Tsunayoshi Kazama's true prowess in the previous game lingered like a shadow over their triumph. Nakatani let out a sigh, signaling for a timeout. Hey? A timeout from Shoutoku. But they're in the lead, aren't they? That's odd. Whispers spread through the crowd as they caught on to who had called the timeout. The Kaioh High players, equally perplexed, quietly watched the Shoutoku High players making their way to the bench. Nakatani rubbed his temples, scrutinizing his team before letting out a sigh. "All right, listen up, everyone. I know that last game was something else. We all saw it. But we're not here to be spectators but to play. Get your heads back in the game." As they exchanged glances, the team collectively realized they needed to shake off the distraction and refocus. "But, coach, did you see that dunk? I mean, who pulls off something like that?" Takao chimed in, his face twisted into a comically terrified expression. A hushed silence fell over everyone after Takao's words hung in the air. Takao's attempt to refocus the team in his comical way left him perplexed, scratching his head awkwardly. He mumbled, "Guess I shouldn't have said that." "Forget it, they're not our main concern right now," Nakatani said, recovering from the surprise of Takao's comment. Maintaining a stern expression, Nakatani redirected everyone's attention. "Instead of dwelling on them, we need to focus on Rakuzan High at the moment. Rakuzan High would likely be awaiting them in the semi-finals, provided they secured the ticket to the next round later. Fukuda Sogo shouldn't be their current priority right now. The current and the next game, the semi-finals, should be their primary focus." Midorima sighed in agreement. Their coach had a point. "I can't allow myself to be distracted if I want to win against Akashi," he mumbled as he took a deep breath. As high as his confidence was, it had wavered in the face of Tsuna's true level that he showcased briefly a while back. However, Tsuna was not someone he should be wary of in his current circumstances. His primary concern should be defeating Akashi before strategizing on how to overcome Tsuna. After realizing this fact, Midorima's eyes regained their usual focus, prompting Nakatani, who observed the change, to nod in satisfaction. Everyone in Shoutoku High appeared to have realized this, trying to refocus. Miyagi loudly slapped himself in the face, Atsubo took a deep breath, wearing a serious expression, and Kimura lightly pinched himself to snap out of it. Takao smiled on the side, however, Miyagi and Kimura suddenly turned to him, making him widen his eyes, quite taken aback. What? Why aren't you doing anything, Takao? Kimura spoke before Miyagi nodded as he stood up. Don't worry, I'll punch you in the face to wake you up. Wait, senior, wait. I'm all focused. Takao paled as he saw that Miyagi was serious before turning to Midorima for help with his gaze. However, Midorima just lightly adjusted his glasses, ignoring him completely. Enough. Fortunately, Nakatani's voice was heard, which stopped Miyagi in his tracks and made Takao sigh in relief. Now that all of you have woken up, let's go out there and show them what Shoutoku is made of. Execute our plays, trust each other, and leave everything on the court. We're not here to watch but to play our hearts out and win. Nakatani's words resonated, prompting a nod from the team. As they returned to the court, the lingering effects of the previous game began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose and focus. Kaioh High players noticed the change in Shoutoku's demeanor as they were making their way back onto the court. What's going on? Looks like they've shifted. What's happening? They couldn't help but voice their thoughts, sensing an intense focus emanating from the Shoutoku players. Despite currently trailing, they held the confidence to reverse the situation, given that the margin was narrow. It was within reach. However, as the game persisted and the Shoutoku players displayed a newfound determination, Kaioh High found themselves overpowered. With the referee's whistle signaling the end of the fourth quarter, the Kaioh High players could only gaze in disbelief at the scoreboard, displaying a score of 104-74. Frustration and tears welled up in the eyes of some, unable to conceal their emotions. We're on the verge of the semi-finals. And still, we ended up losing. Murmurs of disbelief reverberated through the team as they lined up for the post-game ceremonies, their gazes distant and unfocused. Midorima observed this, calmly adjusting his glasses as he walked off the court with the rest of the team. As they proceeded down the corridor, they unexpectedly crossed paths with another team, prompting their gazes to sharpen, including Takao's. Looks like we'll be facing off in the semi-finals, Shintaro. Akashi's voice rang out, yet neither team faltered as Rakuzan High confidently entered the court for their upcoming game. Shoutoku, too, pressed forward without hesitation. Midorima spoke up, confident as always. Hey? Very well, we'll defeat you in the semi-finals, Akashi. Midorima's declaration carried a renewed sense of determination. Witnessing Akashi's unwavering confidence, especially even after seeing Tsuna's true level, stirred a mix of shame and wounded pride within him. That's intriguing, Akashi mumbled quietly upon hearing Midorima's words. A subtle shake of his head conveyed his thoughts. You've changed, Shintaro. As Rakuzan proceeded to exit, the cheers of the audience enveloped them, creating an atmosphere of anticipation. Simultaneously, Shoutoku pressed forward, their determined gazes cutting through the background of raucous applause. Chapter 230, Chapter 227, The Completed Chessboard. The room was shrouded in the stillness of the night as Kagami stirred from a restless sleep, a dull ache throbbing in his head. Erg. Glancing around, he saw his teammates soundly asleep, their forms barely visible in the moonlit room. A sigh escaped his lips, dissipating into the quiet darkness. Wandering through the living room, Kagami's eyes fell upon Aida, peacefully asleep on the couch. An involuntary twitch played on his lips as he observed her, the devil herself, blissfully unaware of her own sins that had disrupted Kagami's rest. Fuck, I can't go back to sleep. Realizing sleep wasn't an option, Kagami opted to step outside for a breath of fresh air. He grabbed a basketball and silently ventured into the cool night, drawn towards the faint glow of the nearby basketball court he often frequented. Taking a basketball with him, he silently slipped out into the cool night, guided by the dim glow of the nearby court he frequented. The looming matchup against Fukuda Sogo, specifically Tsunayoshi Kazama, monopolized his thoughts. Kagami's expression tensed at the recollection of Tsuna's formidable dunk, which had shattered even the combined prowess of the generation of miracles, executed through Kais in both his perfect copy and the zone states. The scene replayed in his mind, each moment edged with the indomitable force Tsuna exhibited on the court. I know Alex had told me about that, but it was just crazy. Kagami muttered lightly to himself. Even with Alexandra's repeated warnings about Tsuna being on another level compared with the generation of miracles, the sheer magnitude of what he had witnessed left him in awe. It wasn't just surprising, it was downright staggering, and Kagami couldn't shake the tremble in his hands. As expected, I'm glad to be back in Japan. Kagami's voice held admiration and determination as he stared at his trembling hands. What's with that smirk, Kagami? A voice suddenly echoed from the side as Kagami dribbled the ball in his hand. His face paled as he was startled, causing the ball to slip out of his hand and bounce toward the figure who had spoken. Kuroko, you sly trickster! Kagami shouted annoyedly, realizing who it was. However, his face eased as he recognized it was Kuroko. He had momentarily thought it was a ghost, creating a brief moment of fear. Kagami shook his head, muttering, I thought I wouldn't be surprised anymore by his low presence. Seems like I was wrong. Kagami glanced at Kuroko, puzzled. What brings you here? Kuroko maintained his usual poker face. I noticed you leaving, so I decided to tag along. A sigh escaped Kagami as he struggled to find the right words, leaving an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. Kuroko was unfazed and even kept his gaze fixed on Kagami, intensifying the awkwardness. Kagami fidgeted, muttering to himself, how is he so calm in this eerie silence? Damn psycho! To break the discomfort, Kagami shifted his gaze to the basketball hoop. He hesitated before asking, ever get scared, Kuroko? Scared? Yeah, facing someone like Kazama. It's like staring down a beast. Can't say I'm not afraid. Kuroko tilted his head, a hint of confusion in his eyes. Fear is normal, Kagami. It's how you handle it that counts. I'm clueless about what to do with it. Kagami admitted the truth. It was a genuine feeling of uncertainty, one he couldn't shake. Yet, there was a peculiar sensation within him that felt oddly familiar. A yearning for the challenge tugged at his limbs. However, his instincts warned him to proceed with caution or maybe even turn and flee. You're drawn to it, Kagami. Like a moth to a flame. Kuroko grinned, piquing Kagami's curiosity as he raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Without uttering a word, Kuroko gently lobbed the ball into the air. Caught off guard, Kagami followed its ascent with widened eyes. His body seemed to have a mind of its own as he instinctively chased after the ball, sprinting towards the basket. In a spontaneous moment, he leaped into the air, snatched the ball mid-flight, and slammed it down through the basket. A resounding noise echoed, magically dispelling his earlier confusion. As he landed, Kagami found himself bursting into laughter, the kind that verged on madness. After a hearty laugh, Kagami coughed and turned to Kuroko, saying, Nice pass, Kuroko. I figured you might enjoy it. Yeah. Kagami shook his head, taking a moment to catch his breath. Calmly, he looked up at the starry night sky. Suddenly, he turned to Kuroko, a rare stern expression on his face. I can't take on Kazama by myself, Kuroko. Will you fight with me? I don't think I can handle it alone. Kuroko let out an unusual chuckle, leaving Kagami wide-eyed in disbelief. Of course, Kagami. You are the light, and I am the shadow. It's only right for us to complete each other. Together, we'll face whatever comes our way. Ha ha ha, you're right. I remember you mentioning that. Kagami chuckled heartily. Their eyes sparkled with a shared understanding, the intensity growing as they prepared to confront their most formidable opponent yet. In the lavish royal suite of the Kazama-owned Tokyo 5 Stars Hotel, Tsuna's figure was seen by the window, taking in the glittering cityscape. Nestled in a plush chair, he faced a circular table where a chessboard lay in the midst of a strategic showdown. The soft glow of city lights played on the pieces as Tsuna contemplated his moves, the bishop in his hand poised for the next play. A gentle knock on the door made Tsuna respond calmly, Come in. Nijimura entered, bowing respectfully before closing the door behind him and approaching Tsuna. Are you still setting up these chess pieces alone? Don't you want some company, young master? Don't bother with something so trivial. Always cold, hey. Nijimura scratched his head, looking a bit embarrassed at Tsuna's straightforward words. What do you think? Tsuna continued setting up the chess pieces, disregarding Nijimura's question about their previous discussion. The semi-finals in 2 days, right after Rakuzan vs. Shoutoku. Nijimura mentioned, showing Tsuna the committee's recent announcement on his phone. I see. It'll be intriguing to see if Shintaro can put Seijuro in a tight spot, Tsuna remarked, nodding. His focus remained fixed on the chessboard, now meticulously arranged. Nijimura observed the chessboard in silence. Throughout the season and day after day, he had been quietly watching Tsuna do his thing. Finally, during his report, he witnessed the completion of the chessboard. "Looks like you finished it," Nijimura replied after pondering Tsuna's question. "You're correct," Tsuna affirmed. "I see." Tsuna's eyes sparkled as his familiar smirk adorned his face. He was now quite eager for the upcoming semi-finals. Chapter 231, Chapter 228, The Semi-Finals. 2 days flew by, and the 4 teams making it to the semi-finals were getting ready to head to the gymnasium for their matches. Fukuda Sogo rode in a private bus en route to the gymnasium. Tsuna sat calmly, engrossed in a book, while the rest of the team chatted eagerly, excited about the upcoming game. Ishida turned to Agiwara suddenly, asking, "Hey, Agiwara, that ghost guy was your childhood friend, right? Are you talking about Kuroko?" "Oh, right. I'm talking about Kuroko." They had practiced together a while back during the inter-high, but at that time, they focused on their individual tasks and never really socialized with either Sirin or Shoutoku, given the intensity of their training. Agiwara responded with a wry smile. He could understand why his teammates referred to Kuroko as a ghost. Kuroko's presence was so subtle that people were often taken aback when they suddenly realized he was there. "Well, yeah, he was my neighbor back when I lived in Tokyo." "HOH? Interesting. What's Kuroko like?" Mochizuki chimed in. Agiwara wore a thoughtful expression as he tried to sum up Kuroko in a word. He chuckled and replied, "Stubborn. That's the best way to describe him." Ishida and Mochizuki's expressions lit up with interest. They then turned to Haizaki, who was idly gazing out the window. Ishida spoke, "What about you, Haizaki? You knew Kuroko at Tiako, right?" Haizaki clicked his tongue upon hearing the question. He knew he'd get pulled into the conversation, and annoyance bubbled within him. Still, memories of his encounter with Kuroko at Tiako flashed in his mind. Back then, he was on the verge of tossing his shoes into a fire pit, ready to quit the basketball club. Kuroko had insisted he stay, unaware that Haizaki's situation wasn't as simple as choosing to stay. Akashi had basically shown him the door. With no other option, Haizaki tossed his shoes into the fire pit, shaking his head mockingly as he declared Kuroko a fool. "So, he's a clueless guy," Haizaki evaluated, summing up his thoughts on Kuroko. He didn't particularly like the guy, but he didn't hate him either. After all, Kuroko was the only one who reached out and asked him to reconsider his decision. However, Haizaki couldn't help but mumble, "And a moron, I'd say." Haizaki knew that Kuroko's actions were for his own selfishness. Not for him, but for Kuroko himself. Oh? So, Haizaki actually held Kuroko in high regard. That's surprising. "Seems like this guy is genuine," Mochizuki said, nodding in understanding. Ishida seemed to share the sentiment, nodding along. Nijimura shook his head in silence at the conversation, thinking, what kind of high evaluation is calling the other guy a moron? However, he glanced around and noticed someone was missing. Nijimura then turned to Tsuna and asked, "Young master, where's Coach Alex?" "She's likely still sleeping." Tsuna kept reading his book, responding casually as if it was a usual occurrence. Nijimura sighed, massaging his temple, while the others chatted and filled the bus with a lively atmosphere. Tsuna was unfazed by the atmosphere and continued with his activities. The bus rolled down the street, passing a bustling road with plenty of people strolling along the sidewalks. In the midst of the crowd were several teenagers sporting Sirin High's sport jackets. "Kagami, did you miss out on sleep again today?" Haiga inquired, spotting Kagami's tired eyes and dark circles. "Yeah." Kagami nodded. Kiyoshi suddenly burst into hearty laughter, throwing his arm around Kagami's shoulder. "Looks like our ace is pumped for today's game, hey?" "Well, you could say that." Kagami replied with a hint of hesitation, leaving the others in confusion, their heads tilting in curiosity. "Why the hesitation?" Kagane couldn't help but express his confusion. "I've got the shoes, Kagami." However, before Kagami could respond, Kuroko chimed in, startling everyone who had just realized he was with them. "Shoes?" Aida looked at Kagami, puzzled. Kagami scratched his head, explaining, "I noticed my shoes were worn out yesterday, so I ran around the city to get new ones, but couldn't find any in my size." He had shared his dilemma with Kuroko, and together, they visited nearby shoe stores early in the morning, only to face disappointment. Luckily, When Kagami mentioned his size, Kuroko realized it matched Ayamine's. Kuroko advised Kagami to wait as he attempted to reach Ayamine through Memoir, possibly asking to borrow the shoes. So, that's why you couldn't sleep. Izuki's eyes widened in realization. The others, who initially assumed Kagami was just his usual hyper self, now wore dumbfounded expressions. Kagami could only sheepishly nod, feeling a bit embarrassed. Meanwhile, in a cozy Tokyo neighborhood, Memoir wrapped up her makeup routine and got dressed. Glancing at herself in the mirror, she smiled, striking a pose before stepping out. Exiting her house, she spotted Ayamine patiently waiting, holding a medium-sized bag. "Why do I need to bring my shoes?" he grumbled, rolling his eyes in annoyance. Memoir chuckled, saying, "Kuroko asked if he could borrow your shoes." "Tetsu? Why?" "Seems Kagami's shoes wore out, and he couldn't find new ones anywhere." Ayamine furrowed his eyebrows at the mention of Kagami. Shaking his head, he followed Memoir to the bus station. Their shoe sizes were a bit large for most Japanese, and finding them ready-made was a real challenge. Ayamine, too, always had to wait for a few weeks to get his shoes, as they had to be imported. So, he could understand why Kagami struggled to find the right size if Kagami's shoe size was indeed close to his. "Daiki, I heard the others are coming to watch the semi-finals. Imioji and the crew." Memoir nodded, checking her phone after reading Imioji's message. He told her to join them at the gymnasium to watch the game together. Even though Imioji and the other third-year students were likely swamped with college exam preparations, they made an exception for today and possibly tomorrow for the final. Seeing the confirmation, Ayamine just shrugged. He didn't really care. Meanwhile, Fukuda Sogo's private bus finally pulled up at the Yaiji Gymnasium. The gymnasium appeared to be bustling with activity, likely due to the heightened excitement of the semi-finals taking place that day since both games promised intense competition between formidable teams. As they stepped off the bus, onlookers caught sight of them and began pointing fingers. "The King of Kings! Whoa, they're here early. Wasn't their game supposed to be after Shoutoku vs Rakuzan?" Whispers spread among those who had stopped to see Fukuda Sogo's players. However, the players seemed accustomed to this attention, calmly following Tsuna's lead as they made their way inside. Chapter 232, Chapter 229, Disinterest in the Limelight. As Tsuna led his team through the entrance of the gymnasium, a pair of adults swiftly approached them. Nijimura sensed something amiss and promptly positioned himself in the middle, blocking their path. "Whoa, hold up! What brings you here?" Nijimura's voice held a stern edge as he scrutinized the newcomers. The two men, clearly taken aback by Nijimura's imposing presence, exchanged nervous glances. One of them cleared his throat, fumbling to retrieve a business card from his pocket. I am Sakamoto, representing Sports Week, and this is my colleague, Tanaka. We were hoping for a moment of your time." "Sports Week?" Nijimura arched an eyebrow, unfamiliar with the name. As the realization dawned on the others in Fukuda Sogo, a ripple of excitement coursed through the group. After all, who wasn't familiar with Sports Week in Japan? They were the vanguard of journalism, specializing in comprehensive coverage of sports news across the country. The prospect of their attention was met with eager anticipation. "We're journalists, and we'd like to interview Fukuda Sogo for a special feature. It's a fantastic opportunity, and we promise it'll make the front page." Nijimura, who was registering the request, exchanged a quick look with Tsuna, who subtly shook his head. Comprehending the situation, Nijimura narrowed his eyes at the two gentlemen. "Sorry, but that's not possible," he asserted. "Please reconsider. It's a fantastic chance to promote your team, and our readers would love to know more about Fukuda Sogo." Sakamoto was completely undeterred and wasn't ready to accept defeat as he persisted in his plea. "I said no. We're here to play basketball, not to be part of some media circus," Nijimura asserted, furrowing his brow. Sakamoto frowned at Nijimura's resolute response, falling into an uneasy silence. His gaze locked with Nijimura's, who remained steadfast without even the slightest hint of hesitation. "Come on, guys. Take it easy." Tanaka sensed the tension and interjected. He tried to defuse the situation. Observing Sakamoto's slightly softened expression, Tanaka sighed and turned to Nijimura. "We understand if it's an inconvenience, but we just thought. Enough. We're not interested. Now, if you'll excuse us." Nijimura's stern tone brooked no negotiation. Satisfied with how Nijimura handled it, Tsuna led the way, followed by the disappointed team members who had hoped for a chance at an interview. Realizing they had hit a dead end, the journalists exchanged glances and reluctantly began to retreat. Observing the Fukuda Sogo players continuing on their path, Sakamoto sighed and made one last attempt. Well, if you change your mind. We won't. Nijimura's voice cut in, shutting him down. With that, Nijimura turned on his heel and swiftly caught up with the team, leaving the bewildered journalists behind. Sakamoto sighed deeply seeing Fukuda Sogo walk away. They refused any interview back during the inter-high as well. It seems like they still don't want any publicity this time. Hey. When the team attempted to request an interview, a foreign butler was the one who turned them away. Complicating matters, the butler didn't speak Japanese, making it challenging for the team to communicate their request. Given the imposing presence of the butler, the team hesitated to approach the others, intimidated by the language barrier and the formidable aura surrounding the staff member. Though they managed to publicize some news about the team with their unique perspective, if given the chance, they would certainly want an exclusive interview with the team. This time, Sakamoto considered it a golden opportunity since there was no discernible butler around when he spotted them. However, even the young teenager who rebuffed them seemed extraordinary himself. Yet, I wonder why they did that though? Isn't it great to be famous? Sakamoto pondered, puzzled by the team's hesitation to embrace fame. Tanaka shook his head, finding it difficult to understand their point of view. It seemed like they strongly disliked being in the public spotlight. Forget it if they don't want it, Sakamoto commented, then turned to Tanaka, asking, have you been in contact with Siren's coach? Tanaka nodded, saying, yes, she mentioned her team would be up for an interview. Well, at least the rest of the teams agreed for an interview. Sakamoto smiled at these words. Besides Fukuda Sogo, the other 3 teams would be joining them for an interview later. Contacting their coach was easy. However, when they tried to reach out to Fukuda Sogo's coach, she didn't respond. Sakamoto figured Alexandra must be pretty busy, given that she coached such a strong team. As Sakamoto considered Fukuda Sogo's coach, he suddenly realized, wait, Tanaka, did you see Fukuda Sogo's coach earlier? No. I don't think I've seen her around. Tanaka replied, making an effort to recall if he had missed any faces around Fukuda Sogo's team earlier. I see, seems like she's a busy person. Sakamoto sighed, shaking his head disappointedly. Meanwhile, in a 5-star hotel room belonging to Kazama's group, a beautiful foreigner with flowing blonde hair lay sprawled amidst a chaotic scene of sake bottles. Despite the room's luxurious decor, the disarray suggested she had reveled in the night before. Her phone interrupted the tranquility with insistent ringing, prompting the slumbering beauty to furrow her eyebrows as she slowly roused from her sleep. However, the aftermath of last night's revelry hit her with a vengeance. Erg, my head! She hissed in pain, a formidable headache assaulting her senses as she gingerly attempted to make sense of her surroundings. She mumbled, realizing her phone was ringing loudly. She reached for the phone, accepted the call, and squinted as she fumbled for her glasses, eventually putting them on. You finally woke up. A tired voice came from the other side. In response, the blonde figure let out a loud yawn, effectively answering the question and momentarily silencing the person on the other end of the call. Why didn't you wake me up earlier, Tsuna? She asked while calmly massaging her temple to ease the headache, addressing the person on the other end. You think I didn't try? Oh? You tried. Tsuna hung up abruptly, leaving Alexandra to puff her cheeks in frustration. Glancing at the watch on top of the cupboard, her eyes widened in disbelief. Is it 10 a.m. already? The room was shrouded in darkness with the curtains drawn. As she fumbled for a button to let in the light, she quickly shut her eyes when the sun nearly blinded her. Hastily, she pressed the button again, closing the curtain. Realizing the sun was already high in the sky, she couldn't help but curse, shit, I drank too much last night. Chapter 233, Chapter 230, A Confident Entrance. Did she really just wake up? Nijimura's voice cut through the air as he observed Tsuna hanging up the phone. Don't worry about it. She's on her way, but she'll be quite late. Tsuna chuckled, settling into the empty section of the audience seats they had reserved. Everyone in Fukuda Sogo exchanged silent glances, shaking their heads in disbelief at the notion that their coach had only just risen from slumber. Aguera was always easily impressed and couldn't help but voice his admiration, as expected of an American, she's so carefree. With a silent sigh, Nijimura retorted, being American has nothing to do with being carefree, you dumbass. He couldn't help but shake his head at Aguera's innocent misconceptions. Still, they're always so loud, Ishida chimed in, his eyes scanning the surroundings. They did it again. Yeah, booked the entire section for themselves. He noticed the arriving audience pointing fingers and engaging in hushed conversations about them. Despite the attention, a satisfied smile played on Ishida's lips at the realization of being recognized by the masses. Ishida basked in the newfound sensation of fame, a feeling he had never experienced before. The same sentiment among his teammates was quite easy to tell, prompting Tsuna to shake his head in mild amusement. His gaze shifted towards the court, where the unfolding scene was about to take center stage. After a few minutes, both teams made their entrance onto the court. The audience's attention swayed from casual chatter to a collective focus on the main attraction, and a wave of exuberant cheers echoed through the gymnasium. Behold the veteran, tirelessly competing for 11 consecutive years, embodying an unswayed immortal spirit that lives up to its name. The legendary king. Shoutoku High. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic shouts, their voices resonating through the gymnasium as they witnessed the players from Shoutoku High School making their grand entrance onto the court. The sheer size of their basketball club was evident, as they had reserved a massive section exclusively for their members. The entire area was teeming with Shoutoku players, a stark contrast to Fukuda Sogo, whose presence seemed meager with only Ishida as their reserve player. Look at them, exuding confidence as always. As expected of the legendary king. Murmurs swept through the spectators as they observed the focused expressions on Shoutoku High's players, sensing a simmering intensity emanating from the players. I really hope they pull off a win today. But, considering their opponent. Amidst these hushed murmurs, a wave of fervent cheers cascaded through the gymnasium as Rakuzan High's players strolled onto the court. You've got a point. Shoutoku's facing the school that's been a fixture in every Winter Cup since its inaugural tournament. The oldest king, Emperor of Creation, Rakuzan High. Once hailed as the unrivaled champions of the past, Rakuzan had suffered a setback during the Inter-High, relinquishing their title of the strongest to Fukuda Sogo. Now, they were determined to reclaim their former glory. Rakuzan High, with Akashi at the forefront, made their entrance, and as both teams stepped onto the court, they commenced the pre-match ceremony and exchanged greetings. With the formalities concluded, the teams retreated to their respective benches for a swift warm-up before the imminent game. Midorima approached Akashi as he remarked, finally, facing each other. Well, I can't say I'm surprised by this. Akashi turned toward Midorima, a light smile playing on his lips. Midorima responded with a casual shrug, maintaining his nonchalant demeanor. In the bracket, Shoutoku found Rakuzan to be their only truly worthy opponent, and vice versa. The subsequent rounds felt more like warm UPS than genuine challenges. Their confidence wasn't arrogance, they simply believed there was no other team capable of defeating them until Siren emerged, accompanied by the unexpected return of Tsuna from the US. Yet, Midorima regarded Akashi with a serious expression, declaring, I will win this, Akashi. You'll lose, as you always do, Shintaro, Akashi replied confidently, not batting an eyelid. Shogi and basketball are different. I might always lose in shogi, but it doesn't mean the same will happen in basketball. In their time at Teiko, Akashi had consistently defeated Midorima in shogi. However, Midorima held a deep confidence in his basketball skills, far surpassing his prowess in shogi. I'd like to see you try then. Akashi responded casually as he strolled away towards Rakuzan High's bench. Midorima observed Akashi's departing figure in silence, then turned and muttered under his breath, I'll teach you the meaning of losing. Turning his attention to where Tsuna sat with his teammates, Midorima declared, and I will avenge our loss from a while ago, Fukuda Sogo. Midorima could instantly see where Fukuda Sogo was located simply because their seats were conspicuously unoccupied amidst the crowded stands which made them easy to spot. Finished with your talk? Atsubo inquired as Midorima returned to the team. Midorima calmly nodded, adjusting his glasses. Atsubo then turned his attention to Rakuzan High's players on the opposing side. After encountering Fukuda Sogo a while back, I thought I wouldn't be surprised to see a first-year assuming the captain's role. Yet, not a single teammate seemed dissatisfied with Akashi. Impressive, I'd say. Miyagi and Kimura nodded, sharing their thoughts. Is it really? Takao scratched his head, casting a brief glance at Rakuzan High's players before his focus settled on Akashi. Sensing the familiar weight of such pressure, Takao muttered, he's undoubtedly a conglomerate heir as well. How did you figure that out? Catching wind of Takao's murmurs, Midorima couldn't help but express his surprise. Takao was not the type to utilize his intellect too often, but he seemed to have finally used his brain, which impressed Midorima. There weren't many things in the world that could genuinely impress him, but this particular moment was an exception. Well, his aura just feels kinda similar to Fukuda Sogo's captain, Takao replied, scratching his head awkwardly. Midorima nodded in satisfaction, a response that irked Takao for some reason. However, Takao couldn't help but scrutinize Akashi's figure closely, confirming his earlier guess. Their auras were undeniably similar. Akashi's aura is pretty imposing, though. Takao remarked, trying to recall Tsuna's aura while making comparisons to Akashi. Despite the similarity, Takao knew which one was more terrifying, having experienced it firsthand. Even though Tsuna's aura wasn't as overtly oppressive and appeared amicable on the surface, Takao shuddered at the memory of his own experience. The ability to effortlessly suppress others, like flipping a switch, lingered in his recollection. Chapter 235, Chapter 231, Kickstarting the Showdown. Kuroko. Over here. Momoa's voice echoed through the corridor, causing Aomine to casually scratch his head as the attention of everyone in the vicinity shifted toward them. The members of Tu Academy nonchalantly turned their heads, glancing at the approaching Siren players. Whoa! Everyone from Tu Academy is here too. Hyga muttered in surprise, not expecting to find the entire team waiting for them. He had assumed it would be just Aomine and Momoa. Well, looks like being winners has kept you guys busy, hey? You've kept us waiting for 10 minutes. Miyoshi remarked with a seemingly polite tone that carried a hint of sarcasm. Ahaha, my bad. We had an interview a while ago. Hyga sheepishly scratched his head, offering a light apology. Oh? An interview, hey? Miyoshi raised his eyebrows with curiosity, maintaining his polite smile. He squinted his eyes and added, certainly something more important than keeping us waiting for 10 minutes. Wakamatsu, typically fiery, shot a weird look at Miyoshi. He was definitely mad. I apologize. We shouldn't have made you wait. Hyga apologized once again, acknowledging Miyoshi's continued sarcasm. The others from Siren joined in with sheepish laughter, sharing a sense of guilt. Aomine sighed, glancing at Kagami as he handed over the shoes in the bag. Here are the shoes. Just don't break them. Kagami accepted the shoes with a nod, saying, thanks, I appreciate it. After his reply, a heavy silence descended, casting an awkward atmosphere. Both of them seemed at a loss for words, their interactions usually limited to the basketball court. In Aomine's case, he lounged around lazily until game time. However, his social skills were on par with Kagami's, leaving them both grappling with the unfamiliarity of casual conversation. Try not to lose too badly, Aomine broke the awkward silence with these words. Kagami frowned but then responded with a confident smile, Ha, I won't lose as badly as you. Don't worry. Hey. Aomine furrowed his eyebrows at the retort. Aomine had attempted to offer a bit of encouragement in his own way, though Kagami was far from understanding his intentions. The jab also annoyed Aomine, prompting him to add, we'll see you try. The two of them locked eyes, creating an intense atmosphere that left everyone around them somewhat speechless at their weird interaction. Meanwhile, as they turned their attention to the girls, a harmonious atmosphere surrounded Momoa and Aida, their faces adorned with bright smiles. It offered a sense of relief to the guys, knowing that at least one interaction was amicable. However, Flatbow Aida, I wish you the best of luck for today's game. Ahaha, you're annoyingly very kind as usual, Momoa. Both women laughed gently, their eyes squinted in a smile. Yet, the atmosphere suddenly turned icy, causing everyone to break into a nervous sweat as they collectively thought, never mind, their interaction was the worst one. Aomine shook his head before redirecting his attention to Kuroko. Well, good luck with your game. Thank you, I'll give it my best. Aomine nodded before offering some advice, Tsuna's strong, and he's the merciless type. Be cautious of his subtle traps. Kuroko nodded, his expression turning serious. The atmosphere around Siren also shifted as their focus intensified. I'll keep your words in mind, Aomine. Thanks. Kuroko expressed gratitude to Aomine, who casually looked away, dismissing it as nothing. Siren had gathered some insight into the kind of person Fukuda Sogo's captain was through observing his gameplay and court control. While surprisingly approachable off the court, he showcased a completely different persona during the game. After chatting for a while, they strolled through the corridor together before finally emerging into the arena where the first round of the semi-finals was set to take place. Once inside, they parted ways to find their respective seats. As they settled down, the realization hit that the game was on the brink of beginning, with players from both teams assuming their positions on the court. Midorima against Akashi, hey! Kagami muttered, memories of Akashi's previous attack lingering in his mind. I'm curious if Shoutoku can pull off a win. Izuki pondered aloud, his gaze fixed on the players on the court. Haiga shook his head, interjecting, it doesn't really matter if they win or lose. We should be more concerned about our own circumstances. Laughter rippled through the Siren team at Haiga's remark, each member chiming in with a unanimous, you're right. Their concern about winning and advancing to the next round had long vanished, it didn't matter much anymore. All they cared about was playing with their best effort and leaving no room for regrets. Aida smiled gently seeing her team's expressions. She then turned toward the court, where the referee threw the ball up in the air. The court buzzed with anticipation as the ball soared into the air. Atsubo's eyes sparked with determination, launching himself skyward, hand outstretched to snatch the ball. Mibuchi mirrored the intensity, jumping alongside him. But when their hands collided with the ball, Atsubo's sheer power gave him the upper hand. In a swift move, he pushed the ball toward Kaioh, who wasted no time in zipping it back to Midorima. Rakuzan High's players were taken aback by the unexpected move, and Mibuchi quickly sprang into action and quickly chased down Midorima. But unfortunately, he was just a hair too late. Midorima was already in his shooting stance as he soared into the air. The ball left his hand in a graceful arc, drawing gasps from the onlookers as they marveled at its elegant journey toward the basket. You'll see me try, you said. Midorima's confident voice echoed across the court, his eyes locked onto Akashi, who smiled in amusement. Undaunted by Akashi's nonchalant demeanor, Midorima retorted, you're still holding your head too high. Well, get ready, Akashi. I'm putting my heart into this. Brace yourself for a first-hand lesson in defeat. With Midorima's bold proclamation hanging in the air, the ball smoothly glided through the basket, the net swishing with a satisfying sound. The crowd immediately erupted into cheers. Right from the get-go. That's our Midorima. Shoutoku, let's do this. Whispers and exclamations spread like wildfire among the spectators. The intensity kicked off right at the beginning, and that's precisely why they gathered today to witness the heat of such an exciting game. Chapter 236, Chapter 232, Emperor Eyes. Akashi's eyes locked onto Midorima, who held his gaze before pivoting back into defensive position. A small chuckle escaped Akashi's lips as Mibuchi hustled behind the baseline to retrieve the ball. As the game rolled on, the ball eventually found its way to Akashi. He dribbled it deliberately while his teammates swiftly followed his lead and advanced, weaving into the defensive formation set up by Shoutoku. Kaioh shadowed Akashi as he closed the distance between them and adopted a tense expression while he put up his best defensive stance. Despite the palpable pressure emanating from Akashi, Kaioh stood his ground. His defense was unwavering, even in the face of the formidable opponent before him. Kaioh trailed Akashi closely, squinting a bit. Now that I'm really paying attention, there's indeed something familiar about his vibe, he mused, shadowing Akashi's casual moves. Yet, the moment their eyes connected, Kaioh sensed an unusual chill creeping down his spine. The radiant ring in Akashi's pupils seemed to dwarf him, making him feel oddly small. I'd appreciate it if you'd step aside. As Akashi uttered these words, he made a swift move. Kaioh blinked, only to find Akashi's stature seemingly growing taller and taller. Before he knew it, Kaioh found himself sitting on the court floor, bewildered. Hey! Confusion painted Kaio's expression as he stared up at Akashi, who calmly glided past his fallen figure. Disbelief painted the faces of Shoutoku's players as they stared at Akashi in utter shock. Midorima wore a similar expression and muttered, he immediately used that. Is this all it takes to leave you frozen in your tracks? Disappointing, Shintaro. A voice sliced through the stunned silence, snapping Shoutoku's players back to reality. Damn it! Kimura, move up! Atsubo's urgent cry reached Kimura, who swiftly hustled to close in on Akashi. But alas, their efforts were in vain. Kimura clenched his teeth, thinking, I won't reach in time. They belatedly realized they had failed to react to intercept Akashi. The crimson-haired player smoothly transitioned into a shooting motion, releasing the ball with a flick of his wrist. It sailed through the air, creating a satisfying swish as it found its mark in the basket. Whoa! Rakuzan fired back in style. The crowd erupted in cheers, thrilled by the showcase of Akashi's prowess. Excitement soared through the roof. Everyone was pumped up, and Tsuna couldn't help but chuckle, feeling Akashi's eyes on him for a moment. He shook his head, saying, "Trying to impress me with your smooth moves, huh? Adorable. Captain, isn't that ankle break?" Unable to contain his curiosity, he couldn't help but ask the question. Agiwara was genuinely surprised, his eyes widening as he witnessed Akashi effortlessly execute an ankle break. "It is," Tsuna replied calmly, a light smile playing on his lips. Observing the shock reflected on everyone's faces, Tsuna added, "Why? Anyone can do such a thing if they know how. It's not really surprising." "Well, if you put it that way, you're right." Agiwara scratched his head as he responded. He came to the realization that the ankle break wasn't an exclusive skill of Tsuna's. There were many skilled individuals out there who could effortlessly break their opponent's ankles just as easily. The misconception stemmed from the fact that they hadn't seen anyone other than Tsuna execute it in Japan, creating the impression that it was an exclusive skill of his. On the other side of the audience, Siren was also in a state of shock. Akashi was actually skilled enough to pull off an ankle break. Kaioh mumbled, his expression filled with surprise. Kuroko nodded in agreement, saying, "I briefly observed Akashi using his Emperor Eyes a while ago. With that ability, executing an ankle break should be a breeze for him." Emperor Eyes empowered Akashi to pinpoint the exact moment when his opponents made a subtle adjustment in their footsteps, enabling him to take advantage of the situation. "Emperor Eyes? What is that?" "It's just his special eyes," Kuroko said as he looked solemn. These eyes let him watch his opponent super closely, so he could basically guess what they'd do next. A somber atmosphere settled as Kuroko continued. "Hey? Seriously, eyes like that exist?" Everyone at Siren was totally surprised by what they just heard. A similar chat was going on at the edge of the crowd. "He's not just guessing, he can see every little thing when someone moves, like how they breathe, their heartbeat, even the sweat and muscles contracting and stuff." The voice sounded kinda uninterested and bored. "So, with this, he can do his moves at just the right time, messing up whatever the other person is trying to do. He knows what they're gonna do before they even do it. Any attack they plan, he's ready for it, and all defenses fall apart in front of him." Murasakibara kept explaining, and Himuro listened wide-eyed. He tore open his snack and added, "Basically, he can see what the other guy's gonna do in the future." Himuro wiped some sweat off his forehead, looking at the court where Shoutoku was going all out, and Rakuzan was keeping up. "So, how do you even battle someone with those eyes? Sounds like crazy powers to me." Murasakibara crunched on his snack, talking with his mouth full, "Dunno, but I'm pretty sure I'd lose for sure." Murasakibara might not get it yet, but facing Akashi made him uneasy, basically because he was scared of him. What went down before had left a big mark on his simple, childlike mind. "But maybe he can figure something out," he said, popping open another snack. Himuro couldn't help but chuckle at how fast Murasakibara was munching away. "By him, you mean Tsunayoshi?" "Yeah, not sure why, but it feels like Tsunachan is still keeping stuff from us," Murasakibara said, casually glancing at the scoreboard where Rakuzan was slightly ahead. "Seriously? It felt kinda unreal. Tsunayoshi Kazama, as he was right now, already seemed like this huge deal that didn't quite fit into Japan's small scene. But he's still hiding something?" It was honestly hard to wrap his head around it. Yet, even though it clashed with his usual way of thinking, Himuro found himself wanting to trust Murasakibara's gut feeling. Back in the game, the first quarter wrapped up with Rakuzan High ahead at 19-20. Both teams strolled back to their benches for a quick break. The crowd was still buzzing, even during the break before the second quarter. They cheered for both Shoutoku and Rakuzan, keeping the energy up. Chapter 237, Chapter 233, Watching His Sun Shine. Shirogane cast a brief glance at the scoreboard before turning to his team. Despite the visible sweat, everyone appeared composed, their breathing controlled. He nodded in satisfaction. "There won't be any changes to the strategy." He spoke slowly, and everyone nodded in agreement. He continued, and if there are any changes on the court, just follow Akashi's calls. Understood, coach. The Rakuzan High players replied resolutely. Mibuchi couldn't help but steal a glance at Akashi, who silently wiped his sweat. Inwardly, Mibuchi thought, to think he would use it right away. That was surprising. Initially surprised by Akashi's immediate use of his Emperor Eyes, Mibuchi couldn't quite grasp the reason behind it, but he was confident there was a reasonable explanation for the move. Meanwhile, on Shoutoku's side, heavy panting contrasted sharply with Rakuzan's composed breathing. This sight prompted Nakatani to frown deeply. It is indeed true that we were quite aggressive in the first quarter, Nakatani silently pondered as he observed his team closely. His eyes sharpened as he glanced toward the opposite side, where Rakuzan players were resting. Continuing his thoughts, he mused, seems like they were no joke. Shoutoku's aggressive play should have applied massive pressure on their opponents, but Rakuzan handled it with remarkable composure. Not only did they withstand the pressure, but they also retaliated, flipping the situation to make Shoutoku feel pressured instead. Let's slow down the pace a bit in the next quarter, Nakatani decided after considering his options. Understood. Shoutoku replied, busily wiping their sweat and attempting to control their breathing. In the Fukuda Sogo seat section, Tsuna lightly curled up his lips upon observing Shoutoku's player's condition. Akashi didn't use much of his Emperor Eyes during the first quarter, Tsuna silently thought. The guy had been utilizing it at the start and only a few more times during specific moments throughout the first quarter, making Tsuna shake his head, that will keep these players on edge every second of the quarter. This was the reason why Shoutoku players depleted their stamina faster. Although it was undeniable that the uncrowned king's improvement also played some role in Akashi completing this subtle move, it was primarily because of his Emperor Eyes that made these players wary and tensed every time Akashi held the ball. It seems like he had taken Midorima's zone into consideration this time, Tsuna smiled, noting that Akashi remained sharp as always. Still. He suddenly redirected his attention to another section, just right beside the Fukuda section. There, he saw a middle-aged man wearing a suit that was obviously tailored and especially expensive, along with a big fishing hat and glasses. Tsuna sighed, he should be busy, right? Why is he here? Tsuna noticed the middle-aged man's bodyguards around him as he shook his head. He then turned to Nijimura, Shozo, ask that gentleman over there to come and sit with me. Be polite. Nijimura tilted his head in confusion as he turned to see the middle-aged man who seemed suspicious, in his opinion. Nonetheless, he nodded and slowly made his way toward the middle-aged man. The bodyguards, seeing a teenager approaching their boss, grew wary. Their bodies tensed up, ready to take immediate action if needed. However, this did not go unnoticed by Nijimura, who had learned martial arts. His eyes immediately sharpened as he thought, this middle-aged man is not your average guy, is he young master's acquaintance? Fortunately, realizing what was going on, the middle-aged man turned toward Nijimura. He gestured toward his bodyguards to ease off, prompting a respectful bow from Nijimura. Hello there, sir. Our young master has invited you to sit with him. Would you mind changing your seat for us? He got right into business. Following Tsuna's instruction to be polite, he executed it precisely as he had been taught by Sabas. The middle-aged man frowned as he glanced at Tsuna's smiling face directed at him. He muttered, rude brat. Pardon. Nijimura widened his eyes in disbelief, thinking his ears were playing tricks on him. However, the middle-aged man didn't say anything as he spoke, tell your young master that I didn't want to make a scene. Oh, understood. Nijimura nodded as he bowed politely, then went back to Tsuna to relay the message that the middle-aged man had refused the invitation. Tsuna shook his head and said, Ha? Look at how he's talking, refusing me? Sorry, uncle, you can't do that yet. He then deliberately sighed loudly as he continued, well, that was unfortunate. I probably should tell some kid of my age that his dad came here without him knowing. Although Nijimura and the others looked confused as to why Tsuna suddenly said that, the middle-aged man's expression darkened as he stood up and approached Tsuna without saying a word. Nijimura's body tensed instinctively, sensing a powerful aura from the middle-aged man before Tsuna raised his hand, it's fine. The others in Fukuda Sogo also felt terrified, their expressions paling, even Hizaki, who was usually fiery. He likes to show off just like his son. Tsuna silently continued, giving a bright smile as the middle-aged man sat down on Tsuna's side disgruntled. You really have no respect for your elders, hey? Threatening me like that. Tsuna chuckled as he spoke, "Oh, Uncle Jiro, I didn't expect to see you here." The man named Uncle Jiro clicked his tongue annoyedly, seeing Tsuna didn't even waver in front of his presence. Thinking he had grown older, he turned to Nijimura, seeing that the teenager was completely on edge, which made him frown, realizing that he had indeed been exuding his powerful aura forged through his lifetimes. He shook his head, thinking that Tsuna was indeed an exception, even his own son would waver in front of him. "All right, tell me, what do you want?" "I just want to quietly enjoy the game." "I'm sure you do. After all, it's your son's match." Nijimura widened his eyes in disbelief, realizing that the man in front of him was Jiro Akashi. No wonder his presence was suffocating, he was the man who led the Akashi group in Japan. He turned to Tsuna and saw that he just shrugged it off as if it was nothing, nodding in awe, as expected of young master. It was nothing for him, "Hey. But, uncle, could you please do me a favor and not scare my teammates?" Tsuna's voice suddenly was devoid of any emotions as he exuded a similarly powerful aura that seemed to almost devour Jiro's. "Ha! Look who's talking!" Jiro scoffed, seeing the others in Fukuda Sogo pale even whiter as his aura clashed with Tsuna. He shook his head and returned back to a normal middle-aged man, making the others flusteredly take a deep breath while watching the middle-aged man warily. Chapter 238, Chapter 234, On the Move. Tsuna smiled at Jiro as he asked, "So, are you here specifically to watch your son play?" "I had a business meeting," Jiro replied with a soured face. However, Tsuna shook his head lightly at the response as he silently thought, he's still as shy as ever, hey. However, their chat was cut short as the game was about to continue, with both teams starting to fill the court once again. "Mayuzumi, support Mibuchi and initiate a double team on Midorima." Approaching Mayuzumi, Akashi received a nod from him, his usual no-expression face unchanged. As the game commenced, the ball found its way to Akashi, immediately putting Shoutoku players on edge. This prompted a frown from coach Nakatani on the side. "They get on edge every time Akashi holds the ball, hey." He frowned deeply. Nakatani had noticed it a while ago, initially thinking they were just nervous at the start. However, it seemed Akashi truly exerted stronger pressure than he had anticipated. "Let's see if we need a timeout later." Takao swiftly closed in, attempting to halt Akashi's free rein in their space. However, Akashi effortlessly changed his pace, swiftly crossing over to Takao's side. This prompted Takao to click his tongue in frustration, muttering, "Shit, he's fast." In the blink of an eye, Atsubo rushed in to back up Takao. And on the other side, Kimura had his eyes on Nebaya as he began to shift his position, noticing that Nebaya was open. Yet, Akashi seemed to anticipate their moves. Instead of passing to Nebaya, the expected choice, Akashi sharply flicked his hand, directing the ball to the opposite side, towards Mayuzumi. Kimura's eyes widened in shock, and he exclaimed, "He saw through me? He's fucking sharp." He reacted swiftly and sharply closed the distance. However, Mayuzumi had already released the ball with the most ordinary shot Kimura had ever seen. All Kimura could do was clench his teeth in frustration as the darn ball effortlessly swished through the basket. Their pace was normal, yet we were unable to stop them. Nakatani carefully scrutinized the Rakuzan High players, his gaze fixated on Akashi. There was an undeniable complexity to Akashi's gameplay. Rakuzan High's captain seemed to play his strategy as if he was playing a shogi, and Nakatani sensed an impending shift. "They're about to make their move," he thought. True to Nakatani's intuition. As the game resumed, a ripple of surprise surged through the Shoutoku players. Midorima found himself not only confronted by Mibuchi but also shadowed by Mayuzumi. "They're putting the double team on Midorima right away." Atsubo silently cursed. They had expected this since Midorima was threatening to any teams out there. However, he didn't know they would do this in the second quarter. No, if he thought about it, it was an obvious option. They had to put a stop to Midorima's shooting spree. Midorima's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. He clicked his tongue in irritation, sizing up the two Rakuzan players standing in his way. "They've got a rock-solid defense. Finding an opening won't be easy," he muttered, Midorima's expression souring with the realization of his predicament. Takao dribbled the ball, clicking his tongue in frustration as he noticed Midorima being closely marked by two players. "Then, I'll count on you, senior." He then swiftly passed the ball to Miyagi. "Oh, it's a one-on-one. Hayama exclaimed with enthusiasm, closing in on Miyagi. The veins on Miyagi's temple pulsed visibly, a clear sign of irritation at Kotoro's boisterous cheer. This guy's getting on my nerves, he thought, dribbling the ball as Hayama fixed him with an eager gaze, his eyes twinkling. Hehe, let's do this! Kotoro exclaimed cheerfully, adopting a relaxed stance. Ishida's eyes widened in surprise at the sight of Hayama's relaxed form on the court. I thought he was still as careless as he was before, he mused aloud. Even from the audience, Ishida could sense the pressure emanating from the game. After all, they were similar types of players. Agiwara nodded, observing Hayama's focused form despite his usually happy-go-lucky attitude on the court. Thinking back to their last game, he remembered how Hayama initially underestimated them, giving them an advantage they capitalized on. Now, though, he noticed Hayama had learned his lesson. The casual approach was gone, replaced by a more focused one. Though it looked like Hayama's attitude was still the same. Without delay, Hayama tapped into his fierce instincts, displaying a newfound intensity. Shoutoku players, sensing the pressure, were surprised. Midorima also furrowed his eyebrows slightly, realizing that Hayama was similar with players like Ayamine, Kagami, or Fukuda Sogo's players. Under the mounting pressure, Miyagi was surprised as he examined Hayama's twinkling eyes, a sharp contrast to the intensity he sensed from the guy. Silently, he resolved, all right then, I'll hit him with Shinsuke's trick. With a sudden burst of speed, Miyagi's nimble dribbling sent the ball weaving through the space between Hayama's legs. Executing a swift spin, he expertly maneuvered around Hayama, breaching his staunch defense. Yet, Hayama's response was anything but flustered. He merely chuckled before commenting, "Oh, you're not too shabby." In a split second, he instantly stepped back as he positioned himself to intercept Miyagi's path to the ball. Miyagi gritted his teeth in frustration seeing Hayama's figure blocking his path. And seizing the moment, Hayama snatched the ball as he bolted forward. That chuckle from Hayama felt like a slap, and now Miyagi was on a mission, tailing after Hayama like a determined detective chasing down a suspect. "Ha, show some respect to your senior, you fucking impolite second year!" Miyagi shouted as he managed to catch up with Hayama. However, his words didn't even shake Hayama in the slightest, and the guy's eyes seemed to shine even brighter, prompting Miyagi to click his tongue in annoyance. "Whoa! You're pretty fast too." Hayama's face lit up with joy, relieved that Miyagi hadn't proven to be too weak. Leaning in, he muttered, my usual preference is 3 fingers." Miyagi furrowed his brows, utterly confused by Hayama's statement. Unfazed, Hayama continued his mumbling, and suddenly, his expression brightened as he declared, "But for you, I'll make it 4. Then, I guess I should thank you." Miyagi sighed with an understanding expression. However, his face suddenly twisted with a touch of anger, and he retorted, "Is that the response you're fishing for, you insane son of a bitch?" Miyagi's irritation spiked, fueled by Hayama's disrespectful behavior. This junior didn't give him an ounce of respect. Hayama embodied everything he found disagreeable in terms of traditional values in Japan. Chapter 239, Chapter 235, The New Sixth Man. "Ha ha ha, you crack me up, senior." Hayama's response was as breezy as a summer day, but his actions spoke volumes. He casually placed 4 fingers on the ball, and the echoing thud of his dribble resonated through the court. Miyagi's eyebrows shot up in surprise as he realized Hayama was handling the ball with only 4 fingers. Before the bewilderment could settle into anger, Hayama sprang into action. The ball became a blur, a streak of controlled chaos as he effortlessly danced through Miyagi's defense. Miyagi couldn't contain his frustration, and it burst out in a loud curse, "Shit!" But Hayama kept moving forward. With a powerful leap, he slammed the ball down the basket, setting off a thunderous cheer from the electrified audience. Miyagi could only look on with frustration etched across his expression as he glanced at Hayama's figure who slowly approached him. Senior, is 4 too hard for you? Should I do 3? Hayama's voice rang out, and Miyagi's temple pulsed with irritation as he glared at the chuckling Hayama, who casually strolled away. "Rude son of a bitch," Miyagi muttered under his breath as the game pressed on. Shoutoku struggled to crack Rakuzan's resilient formation. Midorima faced tight marking, and Miyagi found himself thwarted by Hayama's sturdy defense, unable to counter the relentless attacks. With the scoreboard rapidly tipping in Rakuzan High's favor, pressure mounted on Shoutoku. Kaioh dribbled the ball in front of Akashi, who appeared surprisingly relaxed. Frustrated, Kaioh silently cursed, realizing, he probably didn't even take me seriously, did he? However, it wasn't the time to dwell on such matters. Kaioh saw it as excellent news, considering he wasn't entirely confident he could handle Akashi if the latter was truly serious. Kaioh swiftly maneuvered to the left, closely shadowed by Akashi. He then took a step back and delivered a precise pass to Kimura, who was being closely marked by Nebaya. Nebaya approached with an air of carelessness, prompting Kimura to protest, "Don't underestimate us, Rakuzan." In response, Kimura lofted the ball into the air for an alley-oop. Atsubo leaped towards the ball, snatching it in mid-air, and forcefully slammed it through the basket. Nebaya's face lit up as he looked at Atsubo. "Oh? Almost forgot about him, ha 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 ha. Can you tone it down a bit?" Mibuchi frowned, gently shaking his head. "Ryo's right, Nebaya. We're double-teaming Midorima. Focus on your job." Hayama added, shaking his head too. "Ha ha ha, all right. Nebaya laughed it off, seemingly unfazed by the advice. Akashi frowned slightly at Nebaya's mistake but chose not to dwell on it, recognizing that Nebaya was aware of his error. Rakuzan quickly retaliated as Hayama effortlessly penetrated Miyagi's defense, soaring towards the basket. However, Shoutoku seemed to have foreseen this move. Kimura stepped up as a backup, leaping to block Hayama's attempt. Despite the defense, Hayama's eyes remained bright and twinkling. He smoothly altered his movement mid-air, executing a double clutch before elegantly putting the ball into the basket with a layup shot. Kimura landed on the ground, visibly surprised as his attempt failed. "He's pretty light on his feet too, hey," he muttered softly, glancing at Hayama's figure. The crowd, feeling the heightened intensity of the game, erupted into louder cheers. Shoutoku is having a tough time. Yet, Rakuzan's players have stepped up. It was bound to happen. Well, Shoutoku has improved too, but it looks like it's not quite enough. Fukuda Sogo players exchanged murmurs amongst themselves, closely watching the unfolding game. The talk of Rakuzan's prowess had Tsuna noticing Jiro's prideful expression, as if he personally achieved it. This sight made Tsuna shake his head. If only he'd be more honest in front of Sejuro. Tsuna recognized that his father, Hirutora, shared similarities with Jiro. They both struggled to express themselves in front of their child. Returning his focus to the court, Tsuna observed the momentum swinging back towards Shoutoku as they prepared to counter. Choosing a strategy that proved effective earlier, Kaioh swiftly passed the ball to Kimura. Anticipating Nebaya closing in, Kimura was surprised to see Nebaya maintaining a distance and immediately adjusting his body for a shot. However, he was alarmed as he saw Nebaya slightly lean forward, as if the guy was ready to pounce. Damn, could he reach me from that distance? He dropped the ball, dribbling with sweat rolling down his face. Kimura realized he needed to make Nebaya adjust his position, but before he could react, Nebaya smirked. Mayuzumi's figure emerged like a shadow from behind, striking the ball out of Kimura's hand. "Since when?" Kimura shouted in frustration, swiftly moving to reclaim the ball. However, it was too late. Nebaya immediately pounced on it, passing the ball to Hayama. Midorima's eyes widened in disbelief as he sensed a familiar play unfolding before him. It dawned on him that Mayuzumi had left his side. Upon closer inspection, he saw Kuroko's shadow in Mayuzumi's figure, leading him to realize, he could use misdirection. The audience grew more frenzied, but a hush fell over the section where Siren players were seated. Kuroko stood up in disbelief, closely observing Mayuzumi's figure. "What? That was misdirection, wasn't it?" "Yeah, I just noticed, that player feels a lot like Kuroko. But to think he could actually steal the ball in that same way." They sat there, utterly dumbfounded. "You don't seem surprised, Atsushi," Himuro voiced his confusion, observing Murasakibara's disinterested expression as he casually enjoyed his snacks. Murasakibara simply shook his head lightly. "I was a bit surprised, but honestly, not that much. It was Tsunakin who showed Kurochin a way to find something unique." Murasakibara's voice trailed off as he glanced at Mayuzumi's figure, which felt uncannily similar to Kuroko. He added, "And it was Akin who guided Kurochin into misdirection." Technically, Tsuna hadn't meant to lead Kuroko in that direction, he was trying to emphasize the basics. However, Kuroko misunderstood his words, considering him a benefactor who helped him find his way. Since Murasakibara wasn't aware of the details, he remained in the dark about it. So, you're saying, as long as there's someone compatible, Akashi could create another sixth man on his own? Is that what you mean? Murasakibara nodded in response. As the game pressed on, Shoutoku felt an even greater pressure mounting on their figures, realizing that Rakuzan was even stronger than they had anticipated. This is bad. Nakatani sighed, swiftly moving forward to request a timeout. Chapter 240, Chapter 236, Sky Direct 3-point shot. Shoutoku felt a bit flustered by this unexpected turn of events. All eyes turned to Mayuzumi, sensing that his presence matched Kuroko's in its subtlety. The referee then called for a timeout at Shoutoku's request, prompting both teams to retreat to their benches. Is it okay to reveal Mayuzumi to them? Mibuchi inquired, to which Akashi shook his head subtly. It doesn't matter. Our final opponent is already decided, Akashi added nonchalantly, prompting Mibuchi to raise his eyebrows in surprise. He could sense Akashi's confidence in Fukuda Sogo advancing through the round. As for Rakuzan, Mibuchi himself felt assured that they could repay the debt they owed Fukuda Sogo from the Inter-High, let alone facing Shoutoku. Losing the game was not a possibility he was confident in. Looks like they've caught on that we've got the momentum, Shirogane observed, casting a quick glance at the opposing side. No changes this time. Just stick to Akashi's strategy during the game. Understood, coach. Shaking his head, he redirected his attention to his team. Everyone in Rakuzan High nodded in agreement. Shirogane trusted Akashi's sharp intellect, believing there was little need for him to interfere much with the team. A small smile formed on Shirogane's lips as he silently thought, he's making my job easier. Meanwhile, on the opposing side, Shoutoku was engaged in wiping away their sweat and replenishing their fluids. This wasn't in the playbook. Miyagi remarked while taking a swig from his water bottle. Mayuzumi's presence had thrown a curveball into the game's current dynamics. As they worked to regain momentum by penetrating Rakuzan's defense, another hidden card was unveiled. Even though they were no strangers to misdirection plays, they understood that countering such tactics was a challenge for most teams. Miyagi sighed, shaking his head as he glanced at the scoreboard, a clear sign that they were losing their grip on the game. Should we assign Takao to handle him? Kimura suggested. Thankfully, Takao had experience dealing with these unpredictable situations. Whenever they faced Siren, Takao was the one tasked with neutralizing Kuroko, who employed misdirection tactics similar to Rakuzan. Then I'll switch places with Takao. It might prevent them from easily stealing the ball, with Takao focusing on that third year from Rakuzan, Atsubo proposed, nodding in agreement with his teammates. We'll do that then. Nakatani didn't oppose the idea, giving them his approval. No, let Takao keep his position. However, a voice sliced through the tense atmosphere, drawing surprised raised eyebrows from the team. Miyagi turned to the speaker, questioning, "What do you mean, Midorima? You better have a good explanation, or I'll double your training." Midorima felt a bead of sweat forming at the threat, adjusting his glasses as he explained, "It's exactly as I said. What we need right now isn't just to stop them. While halting their progress is essential, it's meaningless without scoring ourselves." His gaze sharpened as he elaborated on his understanding of their current predicament. Nakatani furrowed his eyebrows, placing a hand on his chin, deep in thought. He turned to Midorima, "So, you've got a plan for it?" Takao chuckled, offering a thumbs up, "Absolutely." Having uttered those words, Takao delved into the details of what he and Midorima had been scheming for quite some time. Atsubo and Kimura exchanged frowns as they listened. "That could certainly help us in our current situation." As the explanation concluded, their faces lit up, and Nakatani gave a nod. "All right, we'll go with your plan this time. Atsubo, Kimura, position yourselves under the basket just in case." Shoutoku's players all nodded in agreement. Midorima didn't take offense, fully aware of the uncertainty of this play. Being cautious was preferable to blind confidence. "Nevertheless, I've brought my lucky item with me. That should elevate it to 100%. He silently declared, casting a glance at the small fox statue on the bench. The timeout concluded, and both teams returned to their positions, filling the court with their presence. The crowd erupted in cheers that reverberated across the gymnasium. Yet, despite the enthusiastic atmosphere, the tension on the court lingered as the game pressed on. Hey? They didn't appear to change any of their strategies. Mibuchi found it perplexing and swiftly approached Midorima as soon as Shoutoku gained control of the ball. He couldn't fathom why the opposing team hadn't made any changes to their strategy. However, he didn't mind, as it seemed to work in Rakuzan's favor. The ball was passed to Kaioh, who dribbled with caution, keeping an eye on Akashi closing in. He felt the tension in his back and the beads of sweat rolling down his face as he thought, I can't let him get too close. Aware of Akashi's emperor eyes, Kaioh knew that even without those eyes, Akashi could steal the ball if he became even the slightest bit careless. Kaioh took a deep breath, subtly increasing the pace in an attempt to find an opening against Akashi's formidable defense. Looks like your buddy's having a tough time over there, Mibuchi remarked, stealing a glance at Kaioh and Akashi. Midorima frowned while still grappling with how to break through the double team. Shaking his head, Mibuchi added, save your efforts, we won't let you off the hook so easily. Mayuzumi's expression remained unchanged, not even flinching at Mibuchi's tendency to taunt opponents as if he were entirely accustomed to such banter. Mibuchi didn't stop there, he lightly chuckled and added, no offense, but without you, Shoutoku would be doomed. Every single one of your teammates seems like a burden. Midorima's eyes sharpened as he turned toward Mibuchi. Mibuchi curled his lips upward in a smirk, thinking he had successfully provoked Midorima. However, despite the intensity in Midorima's eyes, they held only determination, devoid of any other emotion. This surprised Mibuchi as Midorima opened his mouth. Burden, you said. I think you're spouting nonsense, Midorima shot back. Bringing his steps to an abrupt stop, Midorima effortlessly shifted into his shooting stance, even though the ball wasn't in his hands. What is he doing? Mibuchi couldn't shake off the sudden feeling of alarm creeping up on him. Meanwhile, on the sidelines, Kaioh seemed to have an epiphany as he skillfully distanced himself from Akashi and chuckled. Haha, just in time. Shin. Leaning in toward Midorima, Kaioh swiftly sent the ball soaring toward Midorima's eagerly waiting hand. With precise timing, Midorima released the ball in a graceful high arc. Below the hoop, Atsubo and Kimura strategically positioned themselves, ready to make their move as the ball descended from the heavens. Midorima landed gracefully after his jump, his gaze fixed on Mibuchi. Observing Mibuchi's disbelieving expression, Midorima countered, burden? There's no such thing on this team. Turning around, he strolled back, the ball smoothly swishing through the basket. Chapter 241, Chapter 237, Turning the Tide. Whoa! What the heck was that? The crowd erupted into even louder cheers, witnessing an unbelievable combo from Midorima and Kaioh of Shoutoku. They simply couldn't fathom what they had just witnessed as their boisterous voices echoed throughout the gymnasium. Did he just pull off a combo like Zenith Strike from Fukuda Sogo? Izuki muttered in disbelief. It does look quite similar, Hyuga noted, nervously adjusting his glasses on the side. He couldn't help but shake his head, thinking these guys were executing such a ridiculous move right there. I also agree, it felt eerily similar to how Zenith Strike would unfold. Aida chimed in, closing her eyes as she tried to recall the overpowering combo executed by Tsuna and Nijimura. She continued, but, this combo from Shoutoku should be a lot more challenging to pull off. Why? It's mainly because both players need to be completely immersed in this combo to execute it. A slight mistake from either of them will break the combo. Her voice continued, delving into the complexity of the move. Kaioh had to time the pass exactly when Midorima reached the peak of his jump, aiming precisely where Midorima's hand was about to be. Midorima, in turn, had to seize control of the ball within a minuscule time frame and release it flawlessly. It wasn't just technical skill that was required. Eyes in the room sparkled with understanding before transforming into awe at the seamless execution of the combo by Midorima and Kaioh. They needed to trust each other. Aida concluded. In her mind, the Zenith Strike briefly replayed, and she noted that such a strike mainly depended on the one passing the ball, as the receiver only had to slam it down as usual. Even though I mentioned that the Sky Direct 3-point combo was more complicated and Zenith Strike was simpler, Zenith Strike had higher requirements due to the precision needed and the force in passing. Silently noting this, she understood that there was no one else capable of executing such an elusive pass except Tsunayoshi Kazama from Fukuda Sogo and Ryota Kai's from Kaijo. Shifting her focus back to the game, the exhilarating buzz of the Sky Direct 3-point combo by Midorima and Kaioh infused a newfound vigor into the players of Shoutoku High. A wave of heightened pressure swept across the court, causing the uncrowned kings to exchange silent frowns. It was as if the Shoutoku had somehow cranked their strength up a notch. Amidst the heightened atmosphere, Hayama, visibly irked by the sudden change, let the ball echo through the court with an assertive dribble, utilizing just 4 fingers. Closing in with a frown, Miyagi couldn't help but mirror the annoyance etched on Hayama's face. Ha! This ain't as fun as it used to be. Hayama grumbled, voicing his discontent, which seemed to rub Miyagi the wrong way. Yet, a glint of determination sparked in Miyagi's eyes. As Hayama shifted his footwork, Miyagi closed the distance, intensifying the pressure. Feeling the heat, Hayama smirked as he altered his pace with a sudden crossover to the right. In an instant, he broke through Miyagi's defense, leaving the latter scrambling in pursuit. Haha, gotcha with that one, hey. Hayama's laughter echoed behind like an annoying soundtrack, causing Miyagi's veins to practically pop out of his temple. In his mind, he silently vowed, that rude brat, I swear I'll smack some sense into him later. In the blink of an eye, Hayama soared toward the basket, excitement gleaming in his eyes. However, that thrill quickly turned to surprise as a sudden presence loomed at his side. A hand struck the ball in his grip, sending it spiraling out of his control. Reacting like lightning, Miyagi swooped in, snatching the ball before gracefully hurling it forward in Etsubo's direction. Hayama stared at the hand that had thwarted his dunk, and his eyes widened in realization. Midorima's figure emerged, moving with unexpected speed. He muttered in genuine surprise, how the heck did he get here so fast? Rakuzan High players hustled back, a swarm of defenders converging on Etsubo. Being the closest, Nebaya closed the distance with surprising speed. Etsubo with a furrowed brow as he carefully dribbled the ball while searching for an opening in Nebaya's formidable defense form. He's really not your average defender, hey. Etsubo silently thought while sizing up Nebaya's rock-solid defensive stance. Amidst their defensive dance, Nebaya couldn't help but interject with a hearty laugh, ha ha ha, apologies, but I've fueled up on a mountain of food today, I'm practically on fire. Closing in with a determined grin, Nebaya seemed to devour the court with his imposing presence. Etsubo couldn't help but feel the pressure as he took a step back before initiating a crossover to navigate around Nebaya's looming figure. However, much to Etsubo's surprise, Nebaya's colossal frame managed to shadow his every move. Alright, I'll just make a pass then. Etsubo's declaration hung in the air. Stepping back once more, he redirected the ball with a sidelong motion, executing a swift pass that sliced through the defense, finding its mark in Takao's waiting hands. Snagging the ball without missing a beat, Takao's reflexes were in overdrive as he swiftly sent it sailing once more, this time toward Midorima, who was already in a seamless flow of motion. The ball, guided by Midorima's precise shot, soared through the air in a high arc, effortlessly finding its mark with a swish through the basket. Their combo is truly a headache. Mibuchi couldn't help but grit his teeth in frustration, the game slipping further out of Rakuzan's control. The frustration wasn't exclusive to Mibuchi alone. The players on Rakuzan, whose eyes were set ablaze with annoyance, reflected the increasing difficulty of dealing with their opponents. Suddenly, they felt a penetrating gaze and turned to see Akashi, his expression cold as ice. Instantly, their frustration melted away, replaced by a sense of fear. Hayama swallowed hard, he realized they had let their emotions take over and took a deep breath to regain composure. Akashi looked away, satisfied that they had recognized their mistake. The referee blew his whistle, signaling the end of the first half with Rakuzan leading the scoreboard 45-39. He then walked towards the bench, his team trailing behind. Midorima's combo with Takao had provided Shoutoku with an opening to grasp the momentum and stage a comeback, bringing them close to catching up with Rakuzan's score. Noticing the subtle exchanges among Rakuzan High players, Midorima adjusted his glasses, realizing that they had regained their composure. The next half is going to be tough, he muttered to himself as he strolled alongside his teammates to take a break. His lips unconsciously curled up slightly in anticipation. Chapter 242, Chapter 238, Too Small for Him. As Rakuzan High began to walk off the court, Akashi, before reaching the exit gate, turned to glance at Fukuda Sogo. His eyebrows furrowed as he noticed a figure sitting beside Tsuna. He seems familiar. Akashi felt a sense of recognition but couldn't quite place where he had seen the figure before. Intrigued, he took a closer look. What's catching your eye, SEI? Mibuchi's voice snapped him out of his observation. Akashi shook his head, refocusing on walking along, and replied, nothing. Continuing at the same pace, Mibuchi, puzzled by Akashi's peculiar behavior, subtly fixed his hair with an air of elegance before shrugging it off. Meanwhile, Jiro, who was seated with Tsuna, frowned upon sensing his own son's gaze fixated on him. Confident in his subtle disguise, Jiro also knew well his son's sharp observational skills. He shook his head, standing up, prompting Tsuna to raise his eyebrows. "You're leaving already?" "Yeah, I've got something to take care of," Jiro replied nonchalantly. His bodyguards also rose from their seats, prepared to escort him out of the gymnasium. Tsuna shook his head, fully aware that Jiro was speaking nonsense. Considering Akashi's determination to show Tsuna his place, he understood that Akashi might recognize and catch sight of Jiro sitting with him and possibly sensed a familiarity in Jiro's figure. Akashi might even discern that it was his own father who sat alongside his rival. "Uncle, see, Jiro belongs to a higher stage. Japan is too small for him," Tsuna casually commented, prompting Jiro to press on with an aura of authority. This showed Tsuna that Jiro was displeased with what he had just heard. He belongs to Akashi Group. He has his responsibilities. Fukuda Sogo's players couldn't help but flinch as they once again looked at Jiro's figure, swallowing nervously. "I don't understand what Hirutora was doing, but you should also know you have your own responsibilities," Jiro continued with a stern voice. "Don't you realize I've laid the foundation already?" Tsuna smiled, responding with calmness. Jiro frowned upon hearing this, and Tsuna continued, "Well, my dad opposes me doing these things I wanted to do, just like you did, but he gave me a deadline. Well, I was also setting my own deadline, but he didn't need to know." Tsuna silently continued as Jiro walked away without offering any replies. Tsuna shook his head, noting Jiro's stiffness and thinking, "Well, I hope I laid a foundation for you, see Jiro." A chuckle escaped Tsuna as he believed he had done Akashi a favor. Although Tsuna was aware that Akashi's primary position was much like his own, he couldn't help but feel it was unfortunate for such talent to be buried in such a small place. That's why he wished for Akashi to ascend to a higher stage with others he might be able to scout later. After all, Tsuna believed that Akashi was a great prospect. He muttered, he'd be a formidable opponent once he fully bloomed. A smirk played on Tsuna's lips at the thought. His expression made the others lightly twitch their lips, feeling utterly speechless, as they pondered that their captain was likely plotting something again. "Whoa, Fukuda Sogo's here, hey!" A voice suddenly resonated from the side, prompting everyone to turn and see a person being assisted to walk towards them. "What are you doing here, Ryota?" Haizaki frowned as he snapped. It was Kai's, with Kasumatsu aiding him. His body clearly wasn't in a condition to attend a game on his own. "Ahaha, well, how do I say this?" Kai's awkwardly chuckled. He shook his head and continued, "We can't find any places to sit, so I wonder if you guys would be willing to share the seats with us." "That's the story, Fukuda Sogo's captain, Tsunayoshi Kazama. It'd be great if you allow us to sit along," Kasumatsu explained. "Just call my name comfortably. Anyway, it's not like we have any use for these empty seats anyway, so feel free to take a seat," Tsuna shrugged, accommodating their request. "You're the best, Kazamaki!" Kai's exclaimed happily, which prompted Haizaki to click his tongue in annoyance. "Thank you, I appreciate it," Kasumatsu casually thanked Tsuna. He then helped Kai's to sit in the seat beside Tsuna before returning to sit beside Nijimura on the second row. "Wasn't expecting to see you again this fast," Nijimura spoke, nodding at Kasumatsu, who reciprocated. "I wasn't expecting to ask for a favor as well." Nijimura laughed it off, saying, "Haha, it's all good. We have more company to enjoy the game. It's better this way." With the addition of Kai's and Kasumatsu, their conversation became livelier, especially since Ishida and Mochizuki were naturally chatty. However, another figure approached. "Hey there! We'd like to join in as well, is that okay?" Momoa's voice was heard as Ayamine followed behind, looking bored. "Sure, just come and sit with us." Tsuna nodded, giving her his consent. She immediately took a seat beside Tsuna, while Ayamine shook his head before sitting beside Kai's and asked, "What are you doing here? You should be resting. Why do you care? I'd rather watch the semifinals than get bored waiting in a hospital bed." Kai's sulked, prompting Ayamine to sigh exhaustedly. Kai's had indeed been taken to the hospital after his impressive performance against Fukuda Sogo, pushing his body to break through its limitations. Some of his muscles were torn, fortunately not career-threatening. Though, he needed a few months until he was able to get back in the court. But you need to rest, idiot, Mine retorted. Kai shrugged, I'll rest when I'm dead. Besides, the therapy is making me stronger. It's not how it works. Suna and Mamwa chuckled at their banter. However, they didn't seem to care and just continued on their own. Sunachan, do you bring some snacks? I want some. A bored voice was heard, prompting Suna to shake his head, thinking, it's suddenly become so lively here. I didn't bring any, Suna replied after a brief pause. Why not? Murasakibara's confusion was evident as he plopped down beside Mamwa, looking genuinely perplexed. Because I had no idea I'd run into you here. Well, now that you have, could you grab me some? Himuro arrived silently, offering a casual wave as he settled into the second row alongside Nijimura and Kasumatsu, exchanging greetings with them. Ignoring Murasakibara entirely, he left it to Tsuna to handle. I could check with Sabas. Seriously. With their arrival, the atmosphere in Fukuda Sogo's section seat instantly transformed into a lively scene, the addition of these characters injecting a burst of energy into the surroundings. Chapter 243, Chapter 239, No More Shots. Satsuki, aren't you with the others from 2? Suna inquired, assuming that the players from 2 Academy would naturally join in since they were all quite close. Mamwa nodded with a gentle smile, well, we noticed you guys sitting together, so we thought we might as well join in. Huh? Of course, I'm better. I forced Kazumaki to reveal his true level. I can do the same. Their banter was abruptly cut short by Kai's and Ayamine's ongoing argument about who was superior. Mamwa responded with her most angelic smile, accompanied by an unexpectedly devilish aura, which instantly hushed the entire seating section. Suna was amused, but he merely shook his head lightly as the scene unfolded. Before long, their banter continued, and an informal group seemed to take shape. Suna engaged in a conversation with Satsuki, Sabas in tow, delivering Murasakibara's snacks. Meanwhile, Kai's and Ayamine softly continued their ongoing debate off to the side, drawing occasional eye rolls and head shakes from the rest of the group engaged in their own discussions. However, the collective attention soon shifted back to the court. Whoa! They're back! The buzz of excitement rippled through the crowd once more as both teams made their way back onto the court, signaling the imminent start of the second half. Over at Rakuzan High's bench, Akashi prepared himself for the next half, meticulously removing his jacket as a subtle signal that the intensity was about to rise. Should we bring in more players to stop Midorima? And that's easier said than done. Nebaya and Mibuchi engaged in a conversation, brainstorming ways to counter Midorima's prowess, while Hayama eagerly scanned the surroundings with a gleam in his eyes, anticipation bubbling as the game was set to resume. Akashi shook his head, there's no need to add more players to rein in Shintaro. In fact, a double team is unnecessary now. Hey? But we could barely keep him in check with a double team. Wouldn't that be dangerous? Nebaya questioned, his eyebrows furrowed as he carefully assessed the current situation. It won't, as I'll be the one marking Shintaro in the next half. A wave of surprise swept through everyone in Rakuzan, their eyes widening before their expressions brightened. They nodded in agreement, reassured by the confidence in Akashi's decision. Players from both teams flooded the court, ready to dive back into the fray as the second half loomed. Without much delay, the game roared back to life, with Rakuzan securing possession of the ball. Having shaken off the emotional turbulence that gripped them earlier, Rakuzan's players were back in the zone, their focus razor sharp. The atmosphere shifted, and a tangible intensity emanated from the team. What's going on? It's like they're completely different players, Takao muttered, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he sensed the shifting atmosphere. Feeling this sudden change, Shoutoku's players couldn't help but tighten up, a ripple of unease spreading through their ranks. Akashi skillfully dribbled the ball forward before swiftly passing it to Hayama. Miyagi closed in quickly. However, instead of the expected tension, Hayama grinned widely. Miyagi furrowed his eyebrows, a sense of foreboding settling in as he realized something was off. Hee, my bad, but it's time to get serious, Hayama apologized with a sincerity that fueled Miyagi's anger. Yet, in the blink of an eye, Hayama shifted gears, bursting past Miyagi's defense effortlessly. Miyagi could hardly wrap his head around it as he widened his eyes in disbelief. Hayama was somehow getting faster. In that moment of realization, Miyagi noticed a crucial detail: he's using all his fingers now. Hayama had switched up his dribbling technique, utilizing every finger to control the ball. As Hayama closed in on the basket, Atsubo moved in to provide support. Unfazed, Hayama sidestepped and spun around, dismantling yet another defender. With a fluid motion, he tossed the ball into the air. In that split second, Nebaya emerged as he grabbed the ball mid-air and slammed it down through the basket. Atsubo's brow furrowed in response, urging Kimura to retrieve the ball for Shoutoku. With possession now in their hands, Atsubo swiftly passed the ball to Kaioh. They swapped their positions. However, a sudden shift caught him off guard, widening his eyes in surprise. Dribbling with deliberate control, Kaioh kept a watchful eye on Mayuzumi in front of him. Sneaking a glance at Midorima's position, he couldn't help but furrow his eyebrows. "Wasn't expecting you to personally mark me." "What an honor," Midorima's words dripped with sarcasm. Akashi, catching onto the tone, simply shrugged it off. "I have to, Shintaro. And just so you know, your next shot won't be happening," Akashi continued in a calm tone, applying a weighty pressure that made Midorima instinctively adjust his glasses. "I'd like to see you try." Despite the challenging words, Midorima's eyes sharpened, exchanging a glance with Kaioh. A chuckle escaped Kaioh's lips, and without missing a beat, he swiftly passed the ball to Midorima. "I've got to come out on top in this one," Midorima silently declared, recognizing the critical nature of this duel. Winning this duel meant more than just points on the board, it held the potential to tip the scales in Shoutoku's favor. However, Midorima's eyes widened in disbelief as soon as his fingers closed around the ball. Before he could react, a swift hand struck it out of his grasp. In a blink, Akashi materialized, seamlessly stealing the ball and bursting forward. A radiant ring materialized between his eyes, a visual cue to the impending onslaught. The sudden turn of events left the Shoutoku players flustered, reacting with futile attempts to chase after Akashi's elusive figure. Their efforts proved in vain as Akashi leaped into the air, the ball cradled in his hands, and executed a thunderous dunk. The crowd erupted in cheers seeing Rakuzan had kick-starting the second half entirely in their favor. Having just arrived on the scene, Midorima could only watch in surprise, his eyes reflecting shock as he looked at Akashi. "Why? Shocked that I can dunk?" Akashi's words cut through the air as he strolled past Midorima, returning to his position with a casual remark, "Even at 173 centimeters, I can dunk whenever I please." The failed retaliation didn't deter Shoutoku, who seemed unfazed. Yet, this time, caution tinged their approach. Kaioh took his sweet time dribbling the ball, Mayuzumi shadowing his every move with a careful precision that spoke of a renewed strategy. "You really give off a Kuroko vibe. Are you his older brother or something?" Kaioh asked, eyeing Mayuzumi with genuine surprise. However, Mayuzumi's disinterest in conversation prompted Kaioh to shake his head, thinking, their personalities even match. Suddenly, Kaioh smirked as he noticed Midorima shifting into his shooting stance. He deftly sidestepped through Mayuzumi's defense, smoothly passing the ball in the direction of Midorima's awaiting hand. Observing the play, he remarked, "Shin seems unusually eager for some reason." Shoutoku's players grinned, enjoying the scene. However, their smiles stiffened as an unexpected figure materialized, effortlessly interrupting the trajectory of the ball with a swift hand. "I did mention it, didn't I? No more shooting for you, Shintaro," Akashi declared coldly, casting a shadow over the court with his unwavering presence. Chapter 244, Chapter 240, Escalating Tempo. When did he get there? The distance should make it impossible, Kaioh mumbled aloud, reacting swiftly as he pursued Akashi, who was dribbling the ball toward the basket. Approaching Akashi, Kaioh was taken aback when a radiant ring shimmered across Akashi's pupils. Suddenly sidestepping to the left, Akashi led Kaioh astray. Determined to regain control, Kaioh unconsciously followed, only to find his field of vision drastically changing. In a surprising twist, Akashi took a step back, causing Kaioh to lose his balance and fall onto the court. "My words are absolute. So, sit down," Akashi declared without sparing a glance at Kaioh. However, Shoutoku's players were still chasing after his figure from behind, trying to stop him at all costs. Unfazed by the chaos behind him, Akashi smoothly took the shot, and the ball swished through the net. "That combo you pulled off caught me off guard, but it's got a fatal flaw," Akashi stated, his pace deliberate as he walked back. Shaking his head, he continued, "Being left-handed makes it easy to predict the direction of your passes. All I needed to do was interrupt the trajectory once it was almost certain your teammate wouldn't back off. Midorima adjusted his glasses, furrowing his eyebrows as he silently absorbed Akashi's words. He knew it wasn't just about being left-handed. Midorima realized that Akashi had somehow upped his speed, subtly slowing himself down in a way that escaped detection until now. Midorima couldn't help but admire Akashi's meticulous analysis. "You're just as awful as him, Akashi," he remarked, his eyes sharpening as he realized the direness of their situation. However, Akashi's frown revealed his displeasure at the comparison. It was evident he knew Midorima referred to Tsuna. The idea of being likened to someone else seemed repulsive to him. "Don't misunderstand, Shintaro. Our levels are different," he declared arrogantly, prompting Midorima to scoff, which prompted Akashi to frown once again. Their interaction came to an end as the game pressed on. Akashi adeptly neutralized Midorima's combination with Kaioh, leaving Shoutoku struggling to score points against Rakuzan's staunch defense. The scoreboard now displayed 65-51, with Rakuzan in the lead. "You'd be useless if you can't shoot anymore." The blunt words pierced Midorima where it stung the most. Midorima had always relied heavily on his shooting skills. Even in that moment, he found solace in practicing his shooting drills. While he didn't neglect his fundamental skills and could outperform most players, Midorima, deep down, recognized that his shooting ability far surpassed his other talents. However, his pride prevented him from acknowledging this. "That won't happen," Midorima retorted discontentedly. Yet, Tsuna merely shook his head, persisting, "In Japan? There might be a slim chance. Unless you face me or perhaps Akashi. He might be able to prevent you from getting the ball." Midorima furrowed his brow at Tsuna's recurring mention of Japan being a small place. Yet, Midorima didn't truly internalize these words. He hadn't encountered anyone capable of stopping him, and even if such a person existed, he was confident that his basic skills would be enough. The referee's timeout call snapped him back to reality. Observing Nebia's successful dunk for Rakuzan, Midorima chuckled, it seems he foresaw this a long time ago. During their time at Teiko, Tsuna had warned him about the importance of honing other skills besides shooting, emphasizing the possibility of circumstances preventing him from relying solely on his scoring prowess. Yet, Midorima, blinded by pride, had dismissed Tsuna's advice. At that time, Akashi hadn't revealed his eyes as the other Akashi was still in control. And Midorima considered him someone he could easily defeat. "Now, I feel like a clown," he muttered silently, his mind racing for a solution. With his shooting compromised, he needed to figure out a way to contribute to the game. They called another timeout. "Hey!" Nebia's laughter filled the room, loud and never-ending. Mibuchi didn't look too thrilled, muttering, "Can't you just be nice and keep it down?" But Nebia didn't seem to care. His laughter kept going, and Mibuchi let out a tired sigh. On the other side, Akashi stayed quiet as he silently observed Shoutoku on the other side. He shook his head, thinking, "Wiggle all you want, but no, it's futile. We've got this in the bag as long as we handle their shooter," he thought. His attention honed in on Midorima, realizing he was the heart of Shoutoku's morale. In Shirogana's mind, messing with Midorima could mess up Shoutoku's head, since they relied heavily on him. Meanwhile, on Shoutoku's side, Nakatani wore a thoughtful expression. He hummed softly before speaking up, "Let's speed up a bit and try to breach their defense." With Midorima struggling to elude Akashi's defense, Shoutoku had no choice but to attempt their luck from a different angle. They made the bold decision to give it a shot from within. Midorima grasped the situation and nodded in agreement. However, he surprised everyone by suddenly saying, "Coach, count me in." Nakatani turned his head toward Midorima, clearly surprised. What did he just say? The others shared in the astonishment, aware that Midorima usually preferred to stick to shooting from a distance and rarely got involved in such hands-on strategies. "What do you mean by that, Shin?" Takao asked. Despite the puzzled inquiry, Midorima appeared unfazed. He casually adjusted his glasses and replied, "Exactly what I said." Takao furrowed his brow, his confusion lingering. "Instead of sidelining me because we can't pull off a three-point with the combo, it might be wiser to involve me, adding more pressure to their defensive formation," Midorima explained. Makes sense," Atsubo agreed with a nod. Miyagi narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing Midorima. The guy nervously adjusted his glasses under Miyagi's gaze, but Miyagi just sighed and said, if it benefits the team, I'm on board with your idea. Nakatani nodded, contemplating, well, Midorima's fundamentals might not match his shooting prowess, but they're still solid enough to rank him among the top players in this tournament. Seeing the potential, he took a deep breath, his eyes gleaming with determination as he solidified his decision. Alright, let's step up our game a notch. Attack from any open sides, and if there aren't any, create one. Clear. Nakatani addressed the entire Shoutoku team, his gaze sweeping across each player. Got it, coach. They all nodded together, a resolute response. Perfect. Now, get back out there and break through their defense. With that, everyone rose from their seats, realizing the timeout had concluded. As they returned to the court, their eyes sparkled with heightened determination. Despite the challenges, the team knew their situation was still manageable, and that realization fueled their resolve. Chapter 245, Chapter 241, Moving and Reacting Faster. Hey everyone, I've got a bonus chapter for you awesome and understanding readers. Just kidding, it's more like a trade, but let's call it a bonus. So, please show some love with your power stones. Haha. Dash. As the game marched on, Rakuzan High keenly observed Shoutoku High's movements, detecting a subtle hint of strategy. However, the Rakuzan players remained unshaken, their confidence unwavering. As the ball found its way into Shoutoku's possession, Rakuzan's players swiftly transitioned into a man-to-man defense, marking their opponents with precision. Among them, Mayuzumi closed in on Kaioh, who had the ball, ready to face the challenge head-on. Silence hung in the air as Kaioh refrained from uttering a word, fully aware that Mayuzumi wasn't one to respond to verbal exchanges. Despite the lack of words, Kaioh maintained his guard. He sidestepped to the side, expecting Mayuzumi to follow suit. To Kaioh's surprise, Mayuzumi's fundamentals showcased a level of proficiency that surpassed even Kuroko's. A furrowed brow betrayed Kaioh's astonishment. But it's still not enough. Kaioh declared with confidence, pivoting his body in the opposite direction. In a fluid motion, he broke through Mayuzumi's defense, leaving the latter frowning in pursuit of Kaioh's figure. As Kaioh ventured deeper into the court, a surge of alarm gripped him. Nebaya seemed poised to pounce, triggering Kaioh's quick decision to pass the ball toward Midorima. The move caught Rakuzan High's players off guard, as they hadn't anticipated Shoutoku's persistence in trying to navigate through Midorima. I could pass it to the captain, but he's even closer to that guy, Kaioh muttered, his eyes gleaming with confidence in Midorima's abilities. A peculiar feeling had struck Kaioh as he observed Midorima earlier, when they all returned to the court. This sensation is just like the last time he pulled off that stunt. Kaioh smiled, witnessing Midorima confidently secure the ball. Without missing a beat, Midorima immediately started dribbling down the court, catching Akashi off guard. The Rakuzan captain widened his eyes in surprise and questioned, "What are you even trying, Shintaro?" "I don't know, care to guess?" Midorima retorted while taking a deep breath. Suddenly, he changed his pace, executing a swift crossover to the right. In the midst of the maneuver, Midorima caught a glimpse of radiant light in Akashi's pupils. He clicked his tongue in frustration, realizing the ball had been swiped from his hand during the crossover. With a burst of astonishing speed, Akashi charged forward, instantly taking command of the unfolding situation. The momentum shifted as Rakuzan players followed Akashi's lead, all advancing towards the basket. Akashi, with a leap that seemed to defy gravity, aimed for the hoop. However, Midorima's swift arrival disrupted the apparent ease of Akashi's advance. Midorima swung his hand, determined to block Akashi's attempt to score. Yet, the radiant light in Akashi's eyes persisted, and in a sudden and fluid motion, he skillfully placed the ball behind his back. With a swift pass, he redirected it to Mibuchi, who arrived at the perfect moment to receive it. His reactions are as fast as ever. Midorima couldn't help but frown, witnessing Akashi's uncanny ability to navigate through challenges with seemingly effortless precision. "Nice pass, SEI." Mibuchi's exclamation filled the court as he seamlessly transitioned into his shooting motion, gracefully leaping up. "I won't let you." Kimura's shout echoed, his figure suddenly leaping in front of Mibuchi. Chuckling, Mibuchi responded, "Just arrived in time." A smirk played on Mibuchi's lips. With precision, he propelled himself towards Kimura's airborne figure. Shoutoku's players, witnessing the unfolding spectacle, widened their eyes in disbelief. In midair, their figures clashed. Mibuchi swiftly released the ball, sending it soaring high before gracefully swishing through the net. The referee's call echoed across the court, indicating a foul from Kimura, who shot Mibuchi a look of disbelief and slight frustration. "Please don't look at me so intently." Mibuchi spoke shyly, the tone carrying an unintended sting. For Shoutoku, it felt more like an insult, prompting them to grit their teeth in frustration. Mibuchi was unfazed by their response and confidently took the free throw, effortlessly securing another point. The scoreboard now reflected a total of 4 points earned with that clever maneuver. As the game pressed on, Shoutoku maintained their aggressive attacks, probing through every possible avenue. While some attempts found success, Midorima was visibly grappling with the challenges. Sweat rolled down his face, and his back glistened with the evidence of his exertion. Dribbling the ball, he faced Akashi's heavy pressure. Once again, he initiated a crossover, but this time, he subtly altered his footstep, extending it just beyond Akashi's anticipated range of motion. With a sudden turn and a step to the opposite side, he aimed to elude Akashi's vigilant defense. Yet, against the discerning gaze of Akashi's emperor eyes, Midorima's trick was transparent. The ball was once again stolen, leaving Midorima in the position of chasing after Akashi. However, a sudden deceleration from Akashi caught Midorima off guard. Seizing the opportunity, Midorima managed to close the gap, putting up a defensive form in front of Akashi. Akashi scrutinized Midorima closely. However, a nonchalant demeanor marked his expression, as if the outcome was inconsequential. Boldly, he declared, "I don't know what you're trying to do, but my words are absolute. So get thee out of my way, Shintaro." With a sharp crossover to the side, Akashi initiated a series of moves, and Midorima followed suit. But, a sudden step back from Akashi disrupted Midorima's balance, sending him sprawling down the court. Tension gripped Midorima as he tensed up, his gaze meeting the radiant rings in Akashi's cold eyes. Silent and helpless, Midorima could only watch as Akashi scored another point for Rakuzan. As Akashi strolled past Midorima's fallen figure, a mere glance was all he spared before resuming his walk back to his position. "Are you all right, Shin?" Kaioh approached Midorima and extended his hand. Accepting his gesture, Midorima allowed Kaioh to help him up. Silent and contemplative, Midorima didn't immediately respond. His gaze lingered on Akashi's retreating figure. Eventually, he muttered, "Yeah, I'm fine." "Great, we need to." Kaioh's words caught in his throat as he observed a strange smile forming on Midorima's lips. It was a familiar smile, one they had all witnessed before. The same smile Midorima had worn when facing Siren. Excitement surged within the Shoutoku players, fueled by a newfound determination emanating from Midorima. "Focus up!" Behind the baseline, Atsubo roared, signaling the revival of the game. With a swift pass, the ball journeyed from Atsubo to Kaioh, who wasted no time before delivering it to Midorima. As Midorima gripped the ball, a slow, deliberate dribble began. His gaze fixed on Akashi's figure, he reflected, "My dribbling skill might be good, but it's nowhere near enough to get past his defense." A sudden chuckle escaped Midorima, catching Akashi's attention as he felt alarmed by this. Then, Midorima declared, "Then, I need to move and react faster." With his proclamation, Midorima's eyes lit up, a cascade of green sparks streaming across his pupils. A surge of formidable pressure descended upon the court, leaving Rakuzan players in disbelief as they stared at Midorima's figure. He entered the zone. Chapter 246, Chapter 242, Our Turning Point. Is he attempting to break through Akashi's defense using his heightened focus and reaction in the zone? Kai's voiced his confusion, observing Midorima's imposing presence against Akashi on the court. "I've never seen him pull this off before, and given Akashi's skills, it should be a tough task. But with the zone..." Ayamine's voice trailed off as he continued his thoughts, "In the zone, he should be quick enough to make it work." Suna maintained his silence, watching the unfolding scene. His gaze fixed on Midorima, and a small smile curled on his lips as he thought, "Good, you've finally grasped the significance, hey." It took Midorima quite a while to acknowledge his shortcomings. However, Suna had long been aware of this, as he was the one who pointed it out to Midorima. Yet, Midorima's pride had initially hindered him from accepting the truth, and he persisted in his old ways. Sometimes, your own ego and pride become your limitations. Suna chuckled, recognizing how well this description matched Midorima's personality. Midorima had heavily relied on his teammates' passes, often positioning himself advantageously to take shots. If he could enhance his dribbling skills, he would have the ability to create his own openings for shots. Back on the court, a radiant glow emanated from Akashi's eyes as he boldly declared, "Let's see if you truly have something better to show me, Shintaro." In a breathtakingly swift motion, Akashi's figure inclined forward, and his hand sliced through the air with surgical precision, aiming to swipe the ball from Midorima's grasp. Yet, as Akashi's hand closed in, his eyes widened in genuine surprise. Midorima's gaze met Akashi's emperor eyes with an unyielding intensity, devoid of any wavering. Time seemed to freeze, the court enveloped in a suspended moment, like fractured glass suspended in mid-shatter. Then, with an almost supernatural reaction speed, Midorima sidestepped and surged forward, leaving Akashi's once formidable defense in shambles. Akashi found himself momentarily stunned, which was a rare occurrence, before he quickly suppressed it. Swiftly regaining his composure, he pursued Midorima, who was gracefully navigating through the court, rapidly closing in on Rakuzan High's basket. He breaks through Akashi's defense even with Emperor eyes. The disbelief echoed among the Rakuzan High players, their collective shock palpable on the court. No, this was not the time to be shocked. However, Mibuchi immediately shook his head, realizing the impending threat was approaching like a relentless force. "Nebaya!" Mibuchi urgently shouted, prompting Nebaya, who was momentarily frozen in shock, to snap into action. "Fuck, I got it!" Reacting swiftly, Nebaya surged forward, determined to halt Midorima's unstoppable advance. "I've had my fill today. Come on, you son of a bitch!" Despite Nebaya's provocative taunt, Midorima remained seemingly indifferent, his attention unwavering as if the words barely registered. "What?" Suddenly, with a fluid change of pace, Midorima came to an abrupt stop. The atmosphere shifted, a strange calmness settling in his green eyes. Nebaya's muscles tightened involuntarily as a chill ran down his spine. "This guy!" Midorima closed the distance with an unsettling composure, his movements almost ghostly. Nebaya braced himself, but before he could react, Midorima effortlessly dismantled his defense with a deft sidestep, propelling himself toward the basket like a controlled force of nature. In a thunderous collision, Midorima sent the ball soaring through the basket, the sound echoing through the court. "He's a damn monster!" Nebaya muttered under his breath as he watched Midorima's silhouette hanging on the rim before gracefully touching down on the ground. They hadn't anticipated that Midorima possessed such prowess from inside the court. With no prior data to suggest this, Midorima's sudden dominance, especially after entering the zone, felt like a resounding slap in the face, exposing the gaps in their information. In the midst of the boisterous crowd, the Siren players were caught off guard, their eyes wide with disbelief. "He can dunk as well, hey?" Kagami mumbled, his face tense with surprise. It marked the inaugural occasion they witnessed Midorima executing a dunk in an official game. Maybe it's his debut in dunking? Kagami questioned, skeptical that Midorima had ever practiced dunks during his training. He couldn't help but think of Midorima as the type who relentlessly trained his shooting skills until they reached the point of failure. Little did Kagami know, that Midorima indeed adhered to such a rigorous training regimen. A complete freak that focused on shooting. As the intense game unfolded, a palpable tension gripped everyone in Rakuzan, their focus heightened as they advanced with Akashi leading the charge. A furrow appeared on Akashi's forehead as he observed his teammates losing composure once more. Despite his concern, Akashi chose to overlook it, acknowledging that he, too, was taken aback. He dribbled the ball deliberately, and as Midorima's form drew near, Akashi sensed a tangible pressure engulfing him. The atmosphere grew serious, etching a determined expression on Akashi's face. Midorima's calm demeanor and steadfast gaze felt like a challenge, a subtle act of superiority. Akashi felt challenged and refused to let it slide. His eyes glowed radiantly with a ring light in his pupils. With unwavering confidence, he declared, "Your head is held too high, Shintaro. Lower it down." With a commanding shout, he swiftly altered his pace, a sudden change that shattered Midorima's balance, sending him crashing to the court. Without affording Midorima a chance to react, Akashi explosively surged forward, exploiting the stunned expressions on Shoutoku High's players. It was a commanding move, a testament to Akashi's ability to exploit any opening, even in the face of Midorima's heightened prowess within the zone. "So what if I fell?" Midorima calmly muttered, as though the impact with the ground held little significance. With unwavering determination, he invested every ounce of effort into rising to his feet, his words carrying a quiet resilience, falling is embarrassing, but I'd be more embarrassed if I didn't get up. With unwavering focus and a burst of speed, he immediately pursued Akashi. As Akashi soared for a layup, his eyes widened in shock at the sudden interception. A hand swept down, redirecting the ball with a sharp rebound off the backboard. Midorima's figure materialized, the green sparks streaming across his pupils still ablaze. "This is our turning point, Akashi. Don't get in the way." Midorima's declaration cut through the air with a cold precision. The ball reached Takao's hands, who instinctively passed it back to Midorima. Without a moment's hesitation, Midorima propelled himself forward, his speed now amplified, effortlessly weaving through the court like an agile force of nature. Chapter 247, Chapter 243, No longer needed. With no obstacles in his path, Midorima effortlessly added more points to Shoutoku's score, executing a straightforward layup. The team had successfully seized the momentum this time. "Now, let's see what will you do." Suna pondered silently as he observed Akashi on the court. In a prior encounter, Akashi had thwarted Kagami's attempt to shift the momentum smoothly. Using a clever trick with his Emperor Eyes, Akashi exploited Kagami's straightforward nature, making him easy to predict. However, Midorima's case was completely different from Kagami's. Directing a player like Midorima proved challenging due to the absence of complex techniques in his drives. He relied on fundamental and polished movements, lacking the finesse of advanced maneuvers. Yet, this simplicity didn't make him any less formidable. Midorima adapted swiftly to Akashi's movements, responding with calculated precision. As the game unfolded, Rakuzan High found themselves consistently thwarted by Midorima, who had entered the zone. The mounting pressure left them increasingly restless, prone to repeated small mistakes. On the other hand, Shoutoku High, with their heightened focus and the tide of momentum in their favor, capitalized on every error Rakuzan made, turning the game to their advantage. Meanwhile, the ball swiftly returned to Midorima, who wasted no time dribbling it down the court. Yet, Midorima hesitated, fully aware that attempting a shot now would invite Akashi's interception zone or not. His gaze ablaze with green streaks, Midorima locked eyes with Akashi, whose Emperor Eyes had activated once again. His defense remains unyielding. Midorima contemplated, studying Akashi's poised form with a keen eye. Despite the pressure Midorima had exerted on the other Rakuzan players, it seemed to have made little impact on Akashi's unwavering mental state. The captain remained a stalwart force in defense, unperturbed by the challenges thrown his way. However, instead of discouraging Midorima, this realization fueled his confidence to an all-time high. With a sudden burst of speed, Midorima executed a quick crossover to the left. The sharpening of Akashi's Emperor Eyes prompted an immediate response from Midorima. Sensing the impending defensive move, he deftly stepped back, narrowly evading Akashi's attempt to swipe the ball from his grasp. Still, that was expected. Midorima knew that his basic movements might not be as efficient against Akashi's Emperor Eyes, even within the zone. He smoothly sidestepped to the right, creating a deliberate distance as Akashi followed suit. Midorima's smirk betrayed a hint of confidence, setting off an alarm in Akashi's mind. The Rakuzan captain quickened his steps in response. However, it was too late. Midorima seized the moment, leaping upward with a sudden burst of agility. The ball left his hand in a swift release, a departure from his usual methodical pace. The shot soared into a high arc, smoothly swishing through the net as the crowd held its breath, witnessing a display of skill that transcended Midorima's typical shooting style. A quick release. Mibuchi watched in disbelief. Despite the rapid pace of their movements, Midorima managed to execute his shot with an unwavering swiftness. Mibuchi couldn't help but be awestruck, muttering, "His concentration is commendable." Midorima's ability to carve out his own opportunities to shoot, even against Akashi, unsettled the players from Rakuzan High. Shoutoku's sudden surge in points had them on edge as they quickly closed the gap in the score. With Midorima in the zone, he was able to create openings in Akashi's defense, breaking through with finesse. In these moments, he'd either secure a solo score or deftly pass the ball to his teammates if Rakuzan's players swiftly reacted to block. This proved to be a formidable challenge for Rakuzan, disrupting Shoutoku's current surge. Akashi remained silent, his gaze shifting to his teammates, who had lost all composure, their expressions now tinged with frustration and panic. Furrowing his eyebrows in displeasure, Akashi muttered, "Disappointing." His eyes then met Coach Shirogana's, and they exchanged glances. Shirogane nodded, acknowledging the need for a timeout. Recognizing the situation slipping out of their control, they promptly called for a timeout, prompting both teams to return to their respective benches. As the timeouts were called, the thunderous cheers from the crowd gradually dwindled into hushed whispers and discussions. The excitement still lingered, fueled by the fact that Shoutoku had mounted a remarkable comeback. The game proved to be an exhilarating experience for the spectators. They finally decided to take a timeout. "Do you have any predictions on Akashi's next move, Tsuna?" Momoi pondered, placing a finger on her chin before turning to Tsuna. "I'm not sure." "Why are you asking me?" Tsuna shook his head in uncertainty. Momoi tilted her head, persisting, "But surely, you must have some guesses, right?" Upon hearing this, the others swiftly redirected their attention to Tsuna. The Fukuda Sogo players, familiar with Tsuna's knack for making accurate predictions, listened intently. Even Kai's was filled with curiosity. Kasumatsu also observed Tsuna's figure closely as he recognized his intelligence and craftiness, thinking, "He's undeniably sharp, his guesses must hold some truth." Tsuna then chuckled, gently patting Momoi's head, a gesture that softened her expression. The others observed in silence, sensing a peculiar atmosphere between the two. "You're not mistaken, and I do have some speculations." Tsuna spoke, retracting his hand from Momoi's head, leaving her with a disappointed expression. He continued, "Well, get ready for something intriguing." The lack of revelation from Tsuna led to disappointed expressions all around. However, Amin just shook his head, recognizing Tsuna was messing with them as he could see Tsuna's lips curl upward with a playful smirk. He mumbled, "Nasty bastard." Tsuna ignored Amin's words as he directed his gaze at Akashi on the court, sensing the simmering anger within. Silently, he remarked, "Things didn't go as you planned, hey?" Akashi had anticipated Midorima's quick release and his heightened speed and reaction in the zone, having prior knowledge of Midorima's access to that state. However, the unexpected shift in Midorima's approach, emphasizing dribbling skills over blind shooting, caught him off guard. "Is it about time you open up?" Tsuna's eyes gleamed with thoughtful anticipation. "No need to alter our strategy." Akashi's cold voice cut through the atmosphere on Rakuzan's bench, prompting everyone to look at him in disbelief, ready to question his decision. However, their words stuck in their throats as they noticed the icy gaze Akashi fixed upon them, sending chills down their spines. The uncrowned kings, in particular, couldn't help but tighten their fists, realizing the implications of that cold stare. He no longer needed us. Chapter 248, Chapter 244, Embodiment of the Absolute. What's going on with them? Takao couldn't help but express his confusion, observing the Rakuzan High players appearing to be in a low morale state. It perplexed them because the timeout should have served as an opportunity to catch their breath and bolster their determination. Have they thrown in the towel? Miyagi couldn't help but voice his thoughts, considering the momentum was now in their favor. Atsubo, however, shook his head, adding, "They're not the type to give up easily. They're Rakuzan." While Atsubo's words managed to jolt them from their reverie, the team's morale soared at the sight of their opponent's somber atmosphere. Simultaneously, Midorima observed the situation with a solemn gaze, noting Akashi's composed demeanor. Despite the oddity of the situation, he felt a tension in the air, thinking, "He seems colder." The game swiftly resumed as the players returned to the court, and Rakuzan promptly passed the ball to Akashi, slowly advancing their position. However, the Shoutoku players couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The Rakuzan players, who had previously exhibited an aggressive and relentless demeanor, now appeared oddly passive. Confusion painted the faces of Shoutoku players as they exchanged perplexed glances on the court. Are they really giving up? Atsubo couldn't help but entertain the thought, considering the peculiar situation unfolding before them. Yet, Midorima, who had swiftly transitioned into a defensive stance against Akashi, his eyes ablaze with green streaks, sensed a shift in the air. An alarm bell rang within him as he perceived a potent pressure emanating from Akashi, gradually enveloping the entire court. The eerie transformation hinted at a formidable force awakening within Akashi, casting doubt on the notion that Rakuzan was conceding defeat. "I hoped to avoid this to tilt the game my way, but it appears you are stronger than I thought." Akashi's slow, deliberate words cut through the charged atmosphere. Midorima tensed, adopting a defensive stance, while Akashi continued to dribble the ball with an almost casual air. "Avoid what?" Midorima's mind raced at the cryptic statement, his eyes widening in disbelief as Akashi calmly declared, "I acknowledge your strength for making me take this seriously. As Akashi's words hung in the air, a palpable pressure descended, enveloping the entire court and pressing upon the Shoutoku players. Shock registered on their faces as a reddish spark illuminated Akashi's eyes, streaking across his pupils. However, this marks the end of it. Let me demonstrate you my superiority to everyone in the court. I am absolute, and I am the embodiment of the absolute. No one, not even my own parents, can challenge my authority. Akashi's proclamation echoed through the court, a declaration that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. In tandem with his words, Akashi underwent a sudden change of pace, executing a swift crossover to Midorima's right side. Caught off guard, Midorima struggled to react in time as Akashi effortlessly sliced through his defense like a hot knife through butter. Midorima could only pivot and turn, his body reacting belatedly as he chased after Akashi's elusive figure weaving through the court. The audience was excited as Kai's exclaimed, "Akashiki entered the zone. But can he still wield Emperor Eyes in that state?" Nijimura couldn't help but voice his concern, contemplating the implications. If Akashi could still harness the power of Emperor Eyes within the zone, it would elevate him to a level akin to Kai's, who could perfectly replicate the generation of miracles during his own zone moments. The others watched in tense silence as Shoutoku's players, still in disbelief, fumbled with their reactions. Takao left his mark on the court, closing in on Akashi to provide support for Midorima, who was facing an opponent whose prowess had now reached an unparalleled level. "Takao! Watch your move!" Atsubo's shout rang out, a mix of urgency and frustration, as he realized that Takao was marking Mayuzumi. The unique challenge with Mayuzumi, a player akin to Kuroko, meant that Takao and his eagle eyes were the only ones who could effectively counter him. What? Surprisingly, Atsubo discovered that Mayuzumi remained unmoved, not bothering to shift to a better position as if his presence on the court was inconsequential. Observing the expressions of the uncrowned kings felt akin to witnessing dogs left abandoned by their owners. Poor guy! Mayuzumi casually shook his head, his gaze betraying an indifference that hinted at resignation. Acknowledging the futility of his efforts, Mayuzumi decided to conserve his stamina, opting not to engage further. "I might not be well versed in zone stuff, but judging by Akashi's current state, it seems like he won't need any of us anymore." Confidence in Akashi's abilities echoed through Mayuzumi's thoughts. Atsubo's attention sharply turned to Akashi, who now sported radiant, glowing rings in his pupils. With a sudden crossover and a step back, Akashi orchestrated a move that left Takao stumbling and ultimately falling on his backside. So, he can still utilize Emperor Eyes even within the zone. The radiant rings in Akashi's eyes faded, replaced by reddish sparks as he seamlessly continued towards the basket, effortlessly scoring with a simple layup shot. The audience, including Siren, Fukuda Sogo players, and others, watched Akashi's figure in sheer disbelief. Suna observed Akashi with an amused smile, choosing to withhold any comments. As Akashi smoothly landed and resumed his position, Midorima couldn't help but stare, his eyes wide open. The realization dawned upon him that he wasn't merely facing an opponent giving their absolute best in the heightened state of the zone. The revelation hit Midorima hard. He grasped the weight of facing an opponent not only attuned to the heightened state of the zone but also capable of predicting his every move with Emperor Eyes. However, Akashi maintained an air of indifference, not bothering to even spare a glance in Midorima's direction. This indifference fueled a growing frustration within Midorima, who couldn't help but clench his fist in response. "You think I'm not a challenge for you anymore?" Midorima's irritation surged, his emotions evident in his tightened grip. "I respect your skills, but that was just pure arrogance on your part, Akashi." The sparks of green light that streaked across Midorima's pupils intensified, a visual manifestation of his unwavering determination to prove that Akashi's underestimation of him was nothing short of arrogance. Meanwhile, the Rakuzan players, who were lagging behind and returning to their positions, stared at Akashi's back in shock and a hint of resentment, realizing that Akashi had now completely dismissed them. An SEI could obliterate them on his own. Mibuchi reflected with a saddened expression, fully aware of Akashi's terrifying prowess in the zone. The same sentiment seemed to permeate among the uncrowned kings, who lowered their heads in silence as they walked back. Chapter 249, Chapter 245, heading to their match. The Shoutoku players, their momentum utterly shattered, moved forward with a palpable tension as the game resumed. Takao swiftly passed the ball to Midorima. "It's in your hands now, Shin." Takao conveyed, understanding that, given the current situation with Akashi, Midorima was their best hope. A shared understanding rippled through the Shoutoku players as they keenly watched Midorima, who skillfully maneuvered the ball with caution while Akashi closed in rapidly. Dribbling the ball in Akashi's presence, Midorima's eyes widened suddenly. He took a step back, baffled, and voiced his confusion, "What is this?" As Midorima approached Akashi, an unexpected alarm surged through him, causing his hair to stand on end. "Didn't you catch what I said earlier, Shintaro?" Akashi's voice echoed across the court. The intensity of locking gazes with Akashi's nonchalant expression sent a shiver down Midorima's spine. "So what? I'll dismantle your arrogance, Akashi." Midorima shot back. In a swift recovery, he steeled himself, reigniting his determination to win the game and advance. Akashi shook his head in disappointment as he continued, "You're misunderstanding. The arrogance wasn't mine. It was your arrogance, thinking you could still turn this around. It's impossible now." Yet, these words served as fuel for Midorima. The intensity in his eyes flared as he executed a rapid crossover to the right, a move that Akashi effortlessly mirrored. "Persist, and understand it was merely a desperate attempt to defy the absolute." Akashi's voice trailed during the movement. This prompted Midorima to grit his teeth in frustration. With a sudden step back and a fluid spin to the left, Midorima attempted to outmaneuver Akashi. To the surprise of Shoutoku's players, Akashi's figure did not follow Midorima's anticipated movement. Hope flickered in their expressions, only to be extinguished as widened eyes of disbelief revealed the truth: the ball had been swiped from Midorima's grasp. Midorima swiftly pivoted, his body turning to pursue Akashi, who deftly weaved through the court with the stolen ball in hand. Shoutoku players reacted swiftly, a collective surge as they pursued Akashi, fully aware of the passive state Rakuzan High players had descended into. However, as they closed in on Akashi, a surreal sight unfolded. One by one, Shoutoku players found themselves kneeling, their gazes fixated on the radiant rings in Akashi's pupils. He didn't spare them a glance, continuing his relentless rampage, effortlessly scoring another point for Rakuzan. "They're widening the gap once again," Takao muttered. Atsubo shook his head, realizing, "No, it's not them anymore. We're now only up against Akashi." Observing that Akashi no longer spared his teammates a glance, playing solo and disregarding the usual team style. He was familiar with Rakuzan High's playing style from his research. "I need to toss my prior knowledge out the window and focus on stopping him," Atsubo muttered. Now, it was a lone Akashi against the entire Shoutoku High team 5 against 1. Midorima, too, seemed to recognize this shift, his frustration evident in the tight grip of his fist. However, Atsubo gently patted Midorima on the shoulder, prompting a surprised look from Midorima. He suddenly spoke suddenly, "We're a team while he's alone. Don't bear it on your own, share the burden with us." Midorima's tightly clenched fist relaxed as he nodded in agreement. As the third quarter came to an end, Shoutoku players couldn't help but steal glances in Akashi's direction, still grappling with the disbelief of the surreal encounter. Eventually, their attention shifted to the scoreboard, revealing the harsh reality. 73-63 in favor of Rakuzan. A mere 2 points away from catching up just moments ago, before Akashi entered the zone, they had harbored confidence in turning the game around. However, that optimism was now seemed like a distant dream, crushed beneath the relentless might of Akashi. A heavy silence blanketed the court before it was shattered by the crowd erupting into loud cheers. The spectators were in a frenzy, having witnessed the unbelievable sight of Akashi single-handedly dismantling Shoutoku players, turning the once competitive game into a showcase of individual dominance. "That's absolutely insane! Rakuzan! Rakuzan! Rakuzan!" The resounding cheers and shouts of the fans reverberated throughout the gymnasium. On the other hand, Shoutoku's fans wore concerned expressions as their eyes flickered between the game and the widening scoreboard. If Shoutoku couldn't make a significant impact in the last quarter, it was apparent that Rakuzan, or rather, Akashi, would continue to score, further expanding the gap in the scoreboard. As both teams retreated to their benches, a heavy silence settled in. Shoutoku's players had their minds racing, searching for a way out, while their coach pondered with a thoughtful hum. On the other side, Rakuzan sat in quiet disbelief, their eyes fixed on Akashi. Did he really not need us from the start? Hayama couldn't help but think silently, observing Akashi calmly wiping his towel in the quietude. Gritting his teeth, Hayama noticed Akashi's indifference towards them and silently cursed, "Why won't you at least scold us, Akashi?" Receiving cold treatment felt more biting than facing Akashi's scolding, and it wasn't just him, the other uncrowned kings wore expressions of discontent under the chilly reception. Mayuzumi stood as an exception, never truly being part of the uncrowned king's small circle and even having his own dealing with Akashi. What Akashi did didn't carry much weight for him. Not long after, the break between quarters concluded, and both teams returned to fill the court. Shoutoku had committed to stopping Akashi entirely, confident that he wouldn't pass to teammates anymore. They believed that even if he did, they could make mid-game adjustments. However, as the fourth quarter commenced, Akashi swiftly crushed their strategy, single-handedly dismantling their defense. Midorima also found himself unable to counter. The scoreboard expanded rapidly, and before they knew it, the fourth quarter concluded. All eyes turned to Akashi, standing alone in the middle of the court, his cold gaze piercing their souls as they looked at the scoreboard in disbelief. Did we really lose this badly, to just him? Takao expressed his shock, staring at the scoreboard that displayed a crushing 97-63 victory for Rakuzan High. The gymnasium resounded with cheers once again, the excitement echoing through the crowd, especially among those who were fervent fans of Rakuzan High. Amidst the cheers, Tsuna rose from his seat, and Fukuda Sogo's players followed suit in a show of anticipation. Well, this isn't really a surprise, anyway. Tsuna thought silently, observing the result. On the side, Momoa turned toward Tsuna. She offered a gesture of good luck accompanied by a warm smile. In response, Tsuna returned the smile, nodding. He then faced his team and spoke, "Let's get going. We have our own match waiting as well." "Understood, Captain." Fukuda Sogo's players responded energetically, mirroring Tsuna's steps as they headed onto the court. Chapter 250, Chapter 246, The Only Way Out. "Let's move out, we're on our way." "Understood." Haiga declared, taking the lead as Siren rallied and headed toward their upcoming match. Each member of Siren wore a solemn expression, their eyes ablaze with determination. Kuroko glanced at Kagami, who clenched his fist tightly. He then lightly tapped Kagami on the shoulder, making the guy turn to him. Raising his eyebrows in confusion, Kagami looked at Kuroko. As they moved out of the crowd and navigated through the corridors, Kagami's once tight fist now relaxed. The journey led them to their changing room. In the midst of the room, Aida stood, wearing a thoughtful expression. The team members bustled around, preparing their belongings, until they were done and turned their attention to their coach, waiting patiently. "Riko, you there?" Kiyoshi inquired lightly, causing Aida to be taken aback, snapping out of her thoughts. "Right, sorry, I got distracted." Aida coughed lightly, redirecting her focus to the team. She slowly opened her mouth, addressing them, "All right, everyone, I'll brief you on our strategy for this game." Everyone nodded in attentive agreement as they absorbed Coach Aida's words. "We've delved into their records extensively, and I've noticed that Fukuda Sogo's captain tends to initiate with a flashy move at times, usually with a specific purpose. It could be a distraction or an attempt to unsettle the opponent," she explained, recalling some of Fukuda Sogo's past matches. Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm as she continued, "However, this occurrence is relatively rare. Despite their reputation for having a potent offense, Fukuda Sogo's captain consistently adopts a deliberately slow play style at the beginning, akin to setting up pieces on a chessboard, preparing for a strategic opening. And there's no reason to expect anything different this time," she concluded, her gaze shifting towards the Siren players, gauging if anyone had questions. Izuki raised his hand, interjecting, "Should we match their slow pace to observe the opening they create?" A collective nod rippled through the team, indicating a shared concern. However, Aida responded with a smirk, shaking her head, "No." "Hey? Why?" Kiyoshi tilted his head, puzzled by Aida's counterintuitive response. Aida stood her ground, elaborating, "Instead of allowing them to execute their opening while we figure them out, it would be more advantageous for us to disrupt the game's balance right from the start. So, we immediately go on an aggressive start." Kagami voiced his surprise, his eyes widening. "Advantageous? No, it would actually be disadvantageous for us," Kiyoshi mumbled to himself before widening his eyes in realization. He explained, "Wait, yes, it puts us both at a disadvantage with the disrupted rhythm." "Explain it, Kiyoshi," Haiga urged, adjusting his glasses with a solemn expression, drawing everyone's attention. Kiyoshi wore a thoughtful expression as he nodded, "So, instead of waiting for his opening, which might put us in a tight spot, it would be better to drag them into the mud together. That's what our coach intended. That's correct, Tepi. We aim to disrupt the rhythm, putting us both at a disadvantage, Aida affirmed with a firm nod. Realization dawned on everyone as they nodded in unison. Fukuda Sogo posed a formidable challenge, and Aida understood the impracticality of matching their opponent's pace, as doing so might result in being overwhelmed entirely. Hence, this strategy became their sole option. The reason? Balancing the fighting ground by putting both sides at a disadvantage seemed to be the only viable path forward for them. While everyone grappled with the weight of Aida's strategy, she slowly addressed the team, "This is our semi-final." All eyes focused on her petite figure as her expression morphed into a serious and determined look. "And if anything, our opponent today is the toughest one we've had to face," she continued. "But we've trained hard, we're ready, and we're not backing down. Show them what we're made of, play with heart, and let's make this game our moment of triumph so as not to leave any regrets," Aida declared with fervent determination, and her sentiment resonated among the others. They responded with smiles, "Understood, coach." As Siren players were brimming with blazing determination as their excitement seemed to be bubbling across the atmosphere in their changing room, a quite contrasting atmosphere descended in Fukuda Sogo's changing room. Suna massaged his temples wearily, concluding, "Well, that's about it. Raise your hand if you have any questions." Even Nijimura appeared speechless on the side. "Understood, Captain," the team exclaimed in unison. Despite their agreement, not a single hand was raised. Suna had explained their strategy in a manner that made it easily comprehensible. Even if the players couldn't understand the precise objective behind the plan, they were at a stage where they would blindly follow Tsuna's directives. The complexities of their captain's strategy didn't matter, they simply followed orders. "Hey, do you think our coach will be coming at all?" Mochizuki whispered to Ishida, prompting Aguera to lean in closer to catch their conversation. Haizaki curled his lips in irritation, questioning, "Why do I have to be part of this?" Once again, he found himself reluctantly involved. Ignoring Haizaki's protest, Ishida shook his head and responded, "The captain said she'll be coming, so she should arrive soon." Aguera wore a wry smile at Ishida's optimism. He glanced at Tsuna's fatigued expression before turning to observe Nijimura's speechlessness. "Alexandra hadn't arrived yet. Let's give it another 5 minutes." Tsuna sighed as he conveyed the message to the team. He had hoped that, after finishing his explanations, Alexandra would have arrived by then. However, he had underestimated her carefree nature. Despite waiting an additional 5 minutes, there was still no sign of Alexandra. Tsuna gestured for everyone to stand up and prepare to head out. Turning to Nijimura, Tsuna inquired, "She's not picking up her phone." "Whatever, let's just forget about her," Tsuna declared. Nijimura opened the door for him, and Tsuna walked out of the room, with everyone from Fukuda Sogo following suit, wearing expressions of speechlessness. As they made their way out, Tsuna contemplated whether he should assign more responsibilities to Alexandra, as her current workload seemed too light, allowing her to do as she pleased. Achoo! Meanwhile, a beautiful foreigner with long blonde hair sneezed in a nearly empty corridor devoid of people who had already made their way in and taken their seats for the next semi-final round. It must be Tsuna. A shiver ran down her spine. "Where is our changing room again?" Furrowing her eyebrows, Alexandra scanned her surroundings before scratching her head in confusion.
Thanks for listening.